For some reason, Eleniles seemed determined to disappear without a word to Cliff. It felt needlessly cruel to me. Look, I really think you need to talk to him first.
But
Let me help you out, okay? It'll be all right. The two of us ended up heading right over to see Cliff that same evening. When we arrived at his laboratory, Cliff came trotting over to show us the magical diaper in question with a big smile on his face.
Look at this, you two, I've made it smaller already. It's not as heavy as the old one either. You should be able to wear this for some time without...
Cliff, do you love Eleniles? Cutting him off mid-sentence, I put the question as bluntly as I could. Cliff stared at me with a look of blank confusion on his face.
What? Of course I do.
His tone suggested that I'd asked him the single most obvious question in the world. So far, so good. Will you keep loving her, no matter what?
Naturally. I love Lise from the bottom of my heart. You're aware of this, I'm sure.
Well, good. That's what I wanted to hear. I explained the situation to Cliff. I explained that my family was in serious danger. I explained that Eleniles was an old comrade of my dad's and felt an obligation to help. And I explained that it would be a long journey, on which she'd probably need to sleep with other men. I went into great length, covering every relevant detail. Cliff listened silently and didn't interrupt me even once. When it was over, he paused for a moment, then murmured. Frankly, it was true, but it was hard for me to come out and say so. As I hesitated, Eleniles stepped in to reply.
yes, I'm afraid so. You wouldn't be able to endure a journey like this, Cliff.
She might have put it more gently under different circumstances, but this time she was blunt. Frowning sadly, Cliff looked down at the ground. I felt a small, painful stab of sympathy in my chest. What was he feeling right now? Eleniles would have no choice but to sleep with other men on this journey. He understood the situation completely, and he knew she loved him, but it had to be a painful thought. You know, Eleniles, maybe we can bring him along. He can use barrier magic and advanced tier divine spells. Even if he doesn't have much stamina, he might come in handy sometimes.
It's all right, Rudeus. I wasn't useful in the slightest the last time I tagged along on someone else's adventure. This wouldn't be any different.
As he spoke these words, Cliff stepped forward and handed me the magical diaper.
Rudeus,
Yes?
take care of Lise for me.
To be honest, I'd been expecting more wailing and gnashing of teeth, but it seemed Cliff understood his own strengths and weaknesses very clearly.
Lise?
This time he turned to face Eleniles. Standing on tiptoe, he wrapped his arms around her.
Cliff!
She embraced him in return.
When you get back home, let's get married. I know I haven't cured your curse yet, but I want to buy a house and live there with you. I've made you anxious by waiting this long to say that, haven't I? Maybe you were afraid it was all just talk.
Oh, Cliff. But I'm a terrible person. I was planning to go off without even saying a word to you.
I'd like to have the ceremony in the Milla style, if you don't mind. I know you're not a member of the church, but...
Was Cliff deliberately ignoring what she just said? Maybe that was for the best. Eleniles sure looked overjoyed.
Cliff, dearest, I love you so much, more than anyone in the world.
Just like that, she pushed him down onto the floor. Once I saw Cliff's shirt fly into the air, I spun around and quickly left the room. It seemed like they needed some private time at the moment. I wasn't crazy about the way she'd just promised to get married after one last job, but maybe I was just too familiar with movie cliches. I spent the rest of the day going around telling everyone I knew about the situation. I was going to be leaving for nearly a year and a half, at minimum. If there was real trouble in Rappan, it might be more like 2 years. That was a long time to just disappear on everyone. I needed to say my goodbyes, at least. My first destination was the vice principal's office. It was probably best to take care of the formalities sooner rather than later. I found Genius behind his desk, as always, facing down a sizable pile of paper. Hello there, Vice Principal Genius.
Ah, if it isn't Mr. Greyrat, very nice to see you. I've heard you helped Miss 7-Star complete a rather ambitious experiment.
Yeah, that's true. Only because Zenoba and Cliff helped us out, though.
Ah, I see.
I had no idea how word had gotten around about the summoning experiment. Maybe Genius was better informed than I thought.
In any case, what can I do for you today?
Well, I need to take a roughly 2-year leave of absence. I wanted to get the paperwork taken care of right away.
2 years? That's quite a length of time.
Yes. I'm afraid I've got quite a rather complex situation to take care of.
Is that so?
There was no reason I couldn't explain the details, but Genius didn't ask.
Very well then. I'll put your enrollment on hold for the time being. Once you return to us, please come to see me.
Is a 2-year hiatus not going to cause me any issues?
We wouldn't allow it for an ordinary undergraduate, but special students like yourself are allowed a bit more flexibility in these matters.
Good thing I was a special student then. Thank you very much.
That's quite all right. The special student system is designed to be as accommodating as possible, after all.
In that case, could you also put Elenilis Dragonroad's enrollment on hold? As a favor to me? She's not a special student, but she's going to be accompanying me as a bodyguard.
Ah, I see. All right, I'll figure something out.
Well, that was easy. It's nice to have a friend in the bureaucracy. Thanking Genius once again, I left the faculty building behind. A few minutes later, I spotted Linnea and Persenna outside. The two of them waved at me from across the courtyard and trotted over. I took the opportunity to explain the situation to them as well.
No kidding. Man, it's gonna be boring without you around, boss. We're gonna graduate by the time you get back, so I guess this might be goodbye.
That hadn't occurred to me until now, but it was true. They were 6th-year students. 2 years from now, they would probably be back in the Great Forest. It made me a little sad that I wouldn't get to see them off. I guess you're right. That's a shame. Come to think of it, the man-god had encouraged me to begin a relationship with one of these two. If I'd chosen to hang around here until the mating season started in 2 months, things might have taken a turn in that direction.
What's up, boss? Do I have something on my face?
Linnea was an attractive girl. Those twitchy cat ears, swaying tail, and healthy thighs were her most distinctive features, but she had big breasts, too. What was she, an E-cup? All the beast folk girls were on the well-endowed side, so that was probably about average. That cocky attitude would probably make her fun in bed, too.
Sniff? Who? Thinking about going around with us before you leave, boss.
Persina had her charms, too. Those soft, floppy dog ears and her voluptuous body were her most notable assets. Dog-type beast folk seemed to have particularly big breasts for some reason. She had to be a G-cup. I'd groped those things a few times, so I knew how soft they were. How good would it feel to bury your face in them? Sorry. Someone recently advised me to make a move on you two once the mating season comes around. I was just remembering what they said.
Whoa! Seriously? Didn't know you were even interested. Yeah, I never really flirted back, so we figured we weren't your type.
The two of them seemed surprised, but also more than a little amused. Of course, sleeping with them would have meant cheating on my wife, but from what the man-god said, it sounded like Sylphie wouldn't have kicked me out of the house over it. Would she really just forgive me for messing around while she was pregnant? Maybe there'd be an ugly fight before things calmed down? Hard to say. Either way, it would supposedly lead to greater happiness in the end. I loved my wife, but I was also a man. The idea of a harem had a certain appeal. I found myself picturing a foursome with Linnea, Persenna, and Sylphie. In some alternate reality, could that have been my future? Nah, probably not. It was never a real possibility. Linnea, Persenna.
Yeah? What's up, boss?
Linnea and Persenna looked at me nervously. I guess I had spoken in a slightly stern tone of voice. Let's stay friends. The two of them instantly relaxed and shrugged their shoulders.
Well, if you insist, a guy like you could use a few. Friends it is. Make sure you keep in touch.
We ended up exchanging handshakes before we parted, probably a first for us, actually. Some people like to say it's impossible for men and women to really be friends, but that isn't true. You can be friends with someone you're attracted to. It's just a matter of setting the right boundaries. Let's meet again someday, all right? Even if it's 10 or 20 years from now.
Sounds good, boss. We'll both be big shots 10 years from now, so you can bow down before us and kiss our shoes. We're gonna conquer the Great Forest, man.
I had to smile. Good to know they had ambitions, at least. Well, I hope you don't take revenge on me or anything. And so we went our separate ways. If we were lucky, maybe we'd see each other again sooner or later. A little later, I found myself standing in front of Nanahoshi's laboratory. I wasn't sure how to break the news to her. Nanahoshi was a lonely girl at heart. For all her outward hostility, I got the sense she was desperate for company. And more importantly, my absence was going to disrupt her research. Her plan to return home would be delayed significantly. I had to imagine she was going to try to convince me not to go. She might even blackmail me somehow. What was I supposed to do if she threatened to murder Sylphie if I left? Not that I expected her to go that nuts. Letting out a small sigh, I knocked on the front door and waited. The come in came a moment later. Nanahoshi looked up from her desk as I stepped into the room.
What is it? This isn't your usual time.
I'm afraid I've got some unfortunate news, actually.
Unfortunate news.
Nanahoshi's expression turned suspicious. I spent a few seconds debating how to begin before deciding that it didn't really matter. Best to get straight to the point. I'm going on a lengthy journey. My parents are in danger and I need to help them. They're in the labyrinth city of Rapan and the Beggarit continent. It's going to be about 2 years before I'm back.
What?
After a moment of silence, Nanahoshi jumped to her feet, knocking her chair backward with a clatter. She pressed her hands down on her desk and stared at me, looking more stunned than anything.
Rapan Beggarit? Did you...
She repeated the words slowly, as if trying to make sense of them. I know I said I'd help you with your experiments, and I do feel terrible about leaving now, but I really need to go. Nanahoshi's eyes opened wide, and she took a great gulping breath. But instead of shouting, she dropped back into her chair and looked up at the ceiling.
2 years.
Once I get back, I promise to help you again as much as I possibly can.
2 years.
Nanahoshi folded her arms and muttered the words to herself a few more times. She didn't try to stop me or cry out in despair. She just looked up at the ceiling, apparently deep in thought. We spent 5 extremely awkward minutes like this. Well, I guess I'll be going then. There wasn't much else I could say here. Nanahoshi knew I'd been helping her out of the goodness of my heart. She probably wanted to change my mind about leaving, but was choosing to bite her tongue. I turned around to leave.
Hold on, just a minute.
And then I stopped in my tracks. To be honest, I didn't want to continue this conversation. I knew she was just going to try to stop me, but it felt like I owed her a full explanation, so I turned back around. Nanahoshi was rooting around in the bottom drawer of her desk for some reason. After a moment, she took out some kind of book or journal. She flipped through it to a specific page, then turned it around to show me.
Take a look at this.
I leaned forward curiously. Someone had pasted a section from a map onto the page. The map looked familiar enough. It depicted the area around this city, although the scale was a little on the larger side. Near the top of the map, someone had scribbled the characters N1. Down in the southwestern forest was a red X with the characters B3 above them. What is this, Nanahoshi? Nanahoshi was obviously hesitant to explain, but after a few moments, she spoke up.
It's a map of ancient ruins that contain teleportation circles. They can be found all across the world.
Teleportation circles? Huh? Once again, I peered at the map. At the characters B3 specifically. Could that mean...
That right there is a teleporter that will take you to the Beggarit continent.
What? Come to think of it, Nanahoshi had mentioned something like this once when she was telling me about her travels with Orsted. Something about how he used teleportation circles to jump all around the world. But you said you didn't remember where they were? I remembered that part clearly. She told me she had no idea where to find them.
Orsted's warn me to secrecy at the start. This is forbidden magic after all. I agreed readily enough, since I figured I wouldn't be able to remember them anyway.
After a while, though, she'd started making some notes on the teleporter's locations, just in case she ever had to use them. Then she began secretly buying maps or roughly sketching her own. Sometimes she casually asked Orsted where they were or noted the names of nearby cities, and then wrote it all down, instead of trying to memorize it. Stunned, I flipped through the journal. It was a rough and incomplete record. There were times when she couldn't procure a map, or they hadn't even visited a town, so she penned notes like mountains to the left. Roughly 3 days' travel east to reach the river, then 2 more to reach them. The latter part of her marks indicated the continent, and the numbers seemed to be the order in which they'd been accessed. N was the northern region of the central continent. S was the southern region and W the western. DE was the demon continent. They hadn't visited the divine continent. Apparently. But there were a few B's for Begarit. When she didn't even know what continent they were on, she'd used letters like X or Y instead. It was obvious that she'd put a lot of thought into these things.
I've heard about this Rapan place you mentioned. I remember where it is, too. There's a place called Bazaar close to this teleporter, and Rapan is about a month's journey to the north from there. I'm positive.
It's that close? I flipped back to the page Nanahoshi had shown me first. It covered the area from the city of Sharia to the southwestern forest. The scale was a bit unclear, but it looked like a journey of 10 days or so, maybe even less. And the teleportation circle here would bring us to the point marked B3. I flipped back to the relevant page. From the B3 teleporter, it looked to be about a week's journey to the closest town. So if Rapan was only a month away from there, we were looking at 47 days or so and a 94-day round trip. We could get there and back in just 3 months. Even if we took a month to rescue Zenith, we'd be back home in 4. I could make it back in time. I could be here for the birth of my child. I'd still miss out on the mating season thing, but that really didn't matter. Are you sure about this? Didn't Orsted tell you to keep this a secret?
I won't deny I'm a bit conflicted, but I owe you a lot after last time. Just don't share this information with anyone, all right? Teleportation magic is a forbidden art. If word gets around, the ruins will be destroyed by local governments.
And that would make life less convenient for Orsted. He'd probably get mad at both of us. Just thinking about that guy made me tremble a little. I was going to keep my mouth shut, that much was for sure. Thanks, Nanahoshi. This is a huge help.
I just want you to get back here as quickly as possible.
The girl really was pure tsundere. Carefully closing the journal, I lowered my head to her in gratitude, then turned to leave.
Oh, I almost forgot. On the first page, I sketched the signs they used to mark these ruins and described how you dispel the concealment magic that protects them. Make sure you read that carefully.
Got it? I owe you one, Nanahoshi.
No, you don't. I'm just
Smiling at her grumpiness, despite myself, I left the laboratory behind. I immediately headed back to see Elenialis. We could make this trip much quicker than expected. This was fantastic news. She'd be overjoyed, of course, but we also needed to alter our plans completely. The trip was only going to take a month and a half after all. We might even be able to bring Cliff along for that. Slapping my cheeks in an attempt to keep myself from grinning like an idiot, I opened the door to Cliff's laboratory and was greeted by something that resembled a Renaissance painting of Venus.
I'm sorry, Rudeus. I can't go after all.
Elenialis was lounging around wearing nothing but a blanket, and she'd apparently lost her nerve completely. Her slim, elegant limbs and tastefully draped bosom definitely had a certain classical appeal, but I felt no urge to display her in a museum. I'd never been a big art appreciation guy in the first place. It did occur to me that she'd make a pretty sexy figurine, though. Cliff was sitting slumped in a corner of the room looking a bit like an Egyptian mummy. There was a big smile on his face, but he was obviously passed out. He actually looked more like a masterpiece than his girlfriend. What would you title a statue like this? Blissful demise?
I can't bear to be parted from Cliff for 2 whole years. I know it's horrible of me, but I simply won't do it.
Well, people do say women are more guided by their emotions, don't they?
I mean, if you're going, then there's hardly any need for me to tag along to. Your father and I aren't even on good terms. He probably wouldn't want to see my face. Shouldn't I stick around to protect my pregnant granddaughter in any case?
It was hard to remember this was the same woman who'd sternly told me that I should wait here while she took care of everything. I tried my best not to judge her too harshly. She was just returning to reality after a stint in paradise, that was all. Well, okay, Ellen Elize. The thing is, I just found a way that could get us there and back in only 3 months, but...
Huh?
Ellen Elize froze for a moment, staring at me in disbelief.
What are you talking about, Rudeus?
I double-checked that Cliff was still asleep, then leaned down to whisper in Ellen Elize's ear. So actually, Nanohoshi.
Ah, no, not my ears. They're sensitive.
Can you actually pay attention, please?
I was only joking, dear.
I showed Ellen Elize the journal and gave her a quick explanation, making sure to emphasize that Nanahoshi had sworn us to secrecy. She flipped through it a few times, unable to hide her astonishment.
Can we really make it there that quickly?
That's right. If we do it this way, I might even make it back in time to see my child born.
This could work.
A 6-week journey wasn't nearly such a long trip. Ellen Elize seemed to have snapped back into planning mode, judging from how seriously she was scrutinizing the journal.
Oh, all right then. I'll come along after all.
Another sudden change of heart, huh? I did understand where she was coming from, though. 2 years was a really long time. Considering how much quicker this route is, we could bring Cliff with us.
No, we're leaving him behind.
You sure?
I doubt he could keep it to himself if he learned about these teleportation circles.
Really? Cliff was a reasonably trustworthy guy, wasn't he? Then again, he was probably the type to let secrets slip without even meaning to. Yeah, it was probably better to keep as few people in the know as possible. The more people we brought into the fold, the more likely word would get out. Besides, there was trouble waiting for us in Rapan. We wanted to show up with a small, elite group of experienced people. If I were going to take anyone else along, I'd have preferred someone like Ruer. He was both a powerful fighter and as tight-lipped as they come. Badigati came to mind too. He'd been alive for thousands of years, so it was very possible he already knew about the teleportation circles. And he seemed to be familiar with Orsted, so it would be easy to explain the situation to him. Unfortunately, I hadn't seen either of those two in some time. No one else came to mind as a likely candidate. Zenoba might be strong in a brawl, but he definitely wasn't a seasoned traveler. Come to think of it, if we ran into trouble over there, we could always come back and get more help. Better to play it safe for now, since we didn't know our route. But once we'd made the trip, it wouldn't be so hard to come back and fetch a few additional allies. We'd have to tell them about the teleporters, but that was better than falling short of our goal. The trip wasn't brief, of course, but even if we had to wait 3 months for reinforcements, it was at least a viable option. All right, just the two of us for now, then.
Right. Let's get this over with and get back home as quickly as we can.
At least Elle and I seemed to be on board again. For now. Finally, I headed home to tell Sylphie. After gathering her, Aisha, and Norn in the living room, I broke the news right away. I think I'm gonna go help my parents after all. Sylphie let out a small, surprised sound and an anxious expression flashed across her face. I'd taken her off guard, apparently, but after a moment, she shook her head as if to clear it and then nodded seriously.
Okay, I understand. I'll take care of things here.
I'm sorry to disappear like this so suddenly, even though I promised not to.
You're not breaking your promise, Rudy. This isn't sudden and you aren't disappearing.
Sylphie smiled at me, but it looked forced. No matter what she said, she was obviously struggling with this. It made my heart hurt just to look at her.
How long do you think you'll be gone? About 2 years, right?
No. Nanahoshi showed me a way to get there using a teleportation circle. I think I should be back before the baby comes.
I'd already made the decision to tell her about the teleportation thing. If I couldn't trust Sylphie to keep a secret, I couldn't trust anyone.
Ha! You're going to teleport there? Is that safe?
She was obviously startled. The anxiety was visible on her face once again. It made sense that she'd be worried, of course. Both of us had lost a great deal because of the displacement incident. I can't say for sure just yet, but Nanahoshi seems to have used these circles personally in the past, so I think it's going to be all right.
Oh, okay.
Sylphie still looked worried, so I pulled her close to me and whispered the next part in her ear. Don't worry, I'll be back, no matter what.
Right?
Sorry about this.
That's okay.
Turning my head, I spoke to one of my sisters, who stood nearby. Aisha.
Yes?
Her expression was even more uncertain than Sylphie's at the moment. Can I leave things here to you?
I think so. Mom taught me all about caring for pregnant women.
If it gets to be too much for you, get help from anyone you can. Don't be shy, and don't try to do everything by yourself. You're a talented kid, but you're still inexperienced. Turn to the adults when you need advice.
Right.
Aisha nodded seriously. I did feel a bit nervous about this, but it would probably be all right. There was no perfect solution here. Norn,
Yes, Rudeus.
if Sylphie and Aisha get overwhelmed, try to step in to help them, please. Maybe just talk to them when they're feeling stressed. You know how hard it can be to face that sort of thing alone, right?
Of course.
And try to keep up with your studies while I'm gone too.
I'll do my best.
Norn seemed to be very determined to play her role in this properly. Hopefully that wouldn't get her butting heads with Aisha or anything. Well then, what did that leave? Was there anything else I needed to say to them? Oh, right. Maybe we should decide on a name for the kid before I go. I was planning to make it back in time, but you never knew what might happen. It couldn't hurt to get this settled beforehand. What sort of a name would be best? People tended to like cringe-inducingly cool names here, so, if it was a girl, maybe Seal or Scion. If it was a boy, maybe Nero or Wallachia. Nah, this wasn't a video game. Our names were Rudeus and Sylphie, so we could sort of combine parts of them. Maybe something like Sirius if it was a boy, or Lucy for a girl. That was kind of cliché, though. Maybe I should just ask Paul for advice. After thinking all this over for a few seconds, I finally noticed everyone was looking at me with strange expressions on their faces.
Rudy, you want to name the baby?
Why would you say something like that? But
Rudeus?
They seemed genuinely shocked. Aisha even had tears welling up in her eyes. Was the idea that odd? I didn't remember any rules about not naming kids before their birth.
If you name a child before you leave on a journey, you'll never come back home.
Apparently, I'd tripped over a death flag unique to this world. One that I had no memory of. No, wait, I remembered now. Was this about that thing from the story of Perugius?
One of Perugius's companions was an Emperor-tier fire mage named Feroz Star, known as the Fortunate Man. Feroz decided to name his unborn son before departing for the front lines, just in case he didn't make it back safely, choosing to pass the boy his own name. In the battle that followed, however, Feroz was defeated by the Demon King Reiner Kaisel, and he died thinking of the child he'd never lived to meet. His son, inheriting his famous father's legacy, went on to become a magnificent magician in his own right. That was how the tale went, at least. I'd also heard a version where the kid actually turned out to be a good-for-nothing nobody. At any rate, the story was so well known that everyone now thought naming an unborn child before setting off on a journey would bring terrible disaster. It wasn't like that decision had actually caused Feroz's death, of course, but people can be superstitious about these things. Okay then. You think we should wait until I get back?
Maybe.
But I kind of want to have a say in this, you know? And there's always the worst-case scenario,
Don't even talk about that, Rudy.
right? Sorry. Still, this was my firstborn child we were talking about. That didn't feel completely real yet, but I wanted to at least participate in choosing a name. Aisha cleared her throat meaningfully. She'd clearly come up with some sort of proposal.
How about this, brother dear? If the child is born before you make it back, we'll call them Rudeus Jr. temporarily. Once you're back home, you'll pick a proper name. We can make the Rudeus into his middle name like the famous Norse god Kalman.
Rudeus Jr., huh? Well, it wasn't too unusual to give a child their parents' name in this world, and if we ended up going with Lucy, it would turn into something like Lucy Rudeus Greyrat. That didn't sound too bad to me. It did feel a little embarrassing, since I still associated names like that with wealthy aristocrats, but it seemed more common here. Wait a second, though. What if it was a girl, and I never made it back? Would she be stuck with Rudeus Jr. forever? What if she got picked on? What if she turned into a furious little monster who had to beat everyone senseless to defend her stupid name? I tried to convince myself that was unlikely. The world didn't need another mad dog. Well, whatever. Just another reason to make it back home safely. That sounds good to me, I guess. Sylphie?
Yes?
I felt like I had more to say to her, but I couldn't find the right words. I had the feeling anything I could say would come out sounding weirdly ominous. Come here. So instead, I just walked up to her and put my hands on her shoulders.
Huh?
After a moment of confusion, she closed her eyes, lifted her chin, and folded her hands in front of her chest. She was actually trembling a little. This wasn't exactly a first for us, but I wasn't sure we'd ever done it this ceremoniously before. I glanced over at my sisters. Aisha was leaning forward eagerly. Norn had covered her face with her hands, but was peeking between her fingers anyway. I shot the both of them a quick wink. Norn instantly closed her hands over her eyes, but Aisha winked back happily. What a little rascal. Did she really want to see a kiss scene that badly... Well, it couldn't hurt to indulge her just this once. This was a special occasion. I kissed Sylphie deeply and listened to my little sister squealing softly in delight. Chapter 9, to Begarit. Elenilis and I revised our travel plans in a hurry. First of all, we'd purchase a horse and ride it together to the forest where the teleporter was hidden. We'd then warp ourselves over to the Begarit continent. If Nanahoshi's memory was accurate, this would deposit us about a week's journey south of an oasis town called Bazaar. Unfortunately, we'd be traveling through an all but barren desert. Nanahoshi had gotten so exhausted that Orsted ended up having to carry her on his back. We'd have to show up well prepared. I had my magic, so we wouldn't be lacking for ice-cold water at any time. That alone would make things significantly simpler. We didn't have a map to the town of Bazaar, but Elenilis had confidence in her ability to navigate unfamiliar terrain. She claimed that elves could travel through even the densest of forests without ever losing their way. I felt the need to mention that a desert wasn't very much like a forest, but that just earned me an angry lecture about her many years of experience as an adventurer. Given how confident she seemed, I had to assume we'd be okay. Once we made it to Bazaar, we could hire a guide to our final destination. Rappan was roughly a month to the north, and that was a lengthy journey. Elenilis could keep us moving in the right direction, but it would be much faster to find a local who knew the easiest route. After arriving in Rappan, we'd rescue my mother as quickly as possible, then return home by the same route. It would mean telling more people about the teleportation circles, but we didn't have much choice. I couldn't tell my parents to take the long way back. From what we knew, Paul was traveling in a party of 6 people, probably 7, assuming he joined up with Geese. We'd just have to swear all of them to secrecy. Incidentally, I'd made sure to warn Sylphie and my sisters not to tell anyone about the teleporters. Just to drive the point home, I mentioned that a very scary guy who could beat down Rudeus in an instant might get really angry with them if they blabbed. With our basic plan nailed down, Elenilis and I got to work on the details. I already had my gear sorted out. I'd be bringing my trusty staff, Aquahadia, and a robe that Sylphie had picked out for me. The only other thing that came to mind was the summoning spell that Nanahoshi had given me earlier. I didn't know when it might prove useful, but I decided to bring 10 copies of the scroll along with me. I could make a new printing plate in a single day, but I didn't want to be lugging ink around in the desert. The scrolls were much lighter and less fragile, and if I ended up needing more, I could always try to buy some ink in Rappan. On that note, I didn't have any local currency. I wasn't even sure what kind of money they used over there. It was probably easiest to just bring something I could easily exchange for cash. Other than that, I just needed food rations for the journey.
This was my first trip to Greyrat, so I had no idea what sort of tools or equipment I might want. I'd have to obtain them locally as the need arose. Since our journey was only going to last 6 weeks now, I had some free space in my bags to work with. I could technically bring along some things I didn't really need. That didn't mean it was smart to weigh myself down with nonsense, though. It was probably best to travel light. We'd be reaching Bazaar in a week, so it wasn't like we'd be wandering the wilderness for long. Still, I decided to bring along a book that contained some specifics on teleportation magic, given the potential risks we were facing. I knew Orsted had used these things in the past, but that didn't mean it would be safe for us. I headed back to the faculty offices, flattered Genius for a while, and got permission to borrow a few titles from the library on a long-term basis. I picked up the book I had in mind, an exploratory account of the teleportation labyrinth, and grabbed a volume called The Greyrat Continent and the Fighting God Tongue while I was at it. I felt like that one might come in handy if I had trouble making myself understood. I seemed to remember that Ginger knew a thing or two about horses, so I asked her to accompany me to a local stable. I took the chance to let Zenoba know about the situation.
I see. You'll be able to return in roughly half a year, then.
Yeah, I can't explain how, though.
You know, I could order Ginger to go along with you if you'd like.
Don't be ridiculous, Zenoba. Why would I go out of my way to make an enemy of the poor woman?
Well, all right then.
Don't worry about me, okay? Just worry about looking out for Sylphie and my sisters.
There's no need to worry yourself on that account. Perhaps I could even assign Ginger to protect them in your absence.
Is it just me, or are you trying to get her out of your hair? Zenoba glanced over in Ginger's direction, then leaned over to whisper in my ear.
The woman is something of a nag, Rudeus. Ever since I was a child, she's lectured me about every single mistake I make, and lately she's been just as strict with Julie as well. It's getting tedious.
The guy sounded like a college student complaining about his mother. I guess he was in his mid-20s, come to think of it. I could sort of understand how he felt. Sort of. Mostly, though, I just felt bad for Ginger. She was still young herself. The girl was wasting her 20s taking care of an oversized baby. What do you think about this, Julie? Our junior pupil had tagged along on the horse shopping expedition. I'd have to encourage her to keep at her training while I was gone. We could resume the Roichard figure project after I returned.
Miss Ginger just points out Master Zenoba's bad habits.
Well, there we go. Better shape up Zenoba. You need to set a good example for her. Yeah, this really did remind me of a mom barging into the filthy apartment her 2 kids had been filling up with junk. It was kind of heartwarming in a way. Anyway, make sure you keep practicing like you promised while I'm gone, okay, Julie?
Yes, Grandmaster.
Julie wasn't stumbling over her words much at all lately. We had Ginger to thank for that as well. At this point, the woman in question came back over to us, leading a horse along by the reins.
Here you are, Sir Rudeus. I believe this one should serve your needs.
Ooh. The horses in these parts tended to be bulky creatures, since they had to push their way through the snow most of the year. Up close, this one almost looked like a different species from the slender racehorses I was familiar with. It wouldn't sprint as fast, but it looked like it could keep going for days at a time. Horses in this world were monstrously strong in general. For no particular reason, I decided it was worthy of the name Matsukaze. Thank you, Ginger. You've been a great help.
That's quite all right. It was no real trouble.
Want me to ask Zenoba to do something for you? Maybe massage your shoulders?
Sir Rudeus, I have great respect for you, but I wish you'd show a bit more.
Right. Sorry? It was just a joke. Judging from the way she was glaring at me, Ginger didn't find it very funny. Anyway, I had my horse and I'd let the most important people in my life know what was going on. Was I forgetting someone? Maybe. I felt like I'd spoken with all my friends, though. Diggity still wasn't around, but there wasn't anything I could do about that. Well, whatever. I'd checked every item off my to-do list, and I'd sworn everyone who knew about the teleportation circles to secrecy. We were good to go.
On the day of our departure, my wife and 2 sisters saw me off at the front door. I'll be back before you know it, Sylphie.
Rudy.
Sylphie threw her arms around me with tears in her eyes. I'd gotten accustomed to holding her over the last 6 months. Her body was small and radiated warmth. It felt like hugging an affectionate little animal sometimes. But today, her shoulders were trembling, and she was sniffling softly. This wasn't making it too easy to leave, honestly. Should I just stay behind after all? Maybe I could wait for my child to be born before I helped the old man. Think about it. Normally, it would have taken me almost a year just to get out there. Couldn't I stay home for another 7 months and leave after my child's born? The journey should only take 6 weeks now, so I could still make it on schedule. I wasn't strong enough to keep the thoughts from flitting through my mind. But at the end of the day, Geese had been desperate enough to send an express message from the big arid continent. Those services weren't cheap, even for the briefest of letters. It wasn't something you did unless you had to. Time was probably of the essence, and if I left now, I could still make it back to see my child be born. I just had to think of it as a kind of business trip, basically. Wiping away Sylphie's tears, I spoke to my sisters, who were standing awkwardly behind her in the foyer. Aisha, Norn, I'll see you later. Take care of things for me, okay? I wasn't entirely sure myself what that was supposed to mean, but the 2 of them nodded emphatically.
Don't worry, brother dear. I'll keep matters well in hand here.
Of course, Rudeus. Be careful out there.
Good to hear. Try not to fight with each other, okay? They replied yes, in perfect unison. I couldn't help smiling at the grimly serious expressions on their faces.
Sylphie!
Elenice chose this moment to ride up dramatically on our horse. He was carrying 2 full weeks of provisions on his back, but didn't even seem to feel the weight. Our Matsukaze really was a beast.
Be brave, dear. You'll be all right. You don't need a husband hanging around to give birth anyway. Trust me, I'm speaking from experience on this one.
I guess so. You be careful out there too, Grandma.
Oh, don't worry about me. I'll manage just fine.
Elenice flipped her hair upward in a gesture of supreme confidence. The woman could be cool when she wanted to. She looked like a lady knight from a fairy tale, or something. It was a shame I'd seen her throwing a tantrum just the other day. The memory of that kind of tainted the whole experience. Well, I guess everyone has their weak spots, right? I certainly wasn't lacking a few of my own. Okay then, we'd better get on the road. Not wasting any more time, I hopped up behind Elenice. She was a slender woman, but she sat Ramrod straight in the saddle. It was kind of reassuring to know she had the reins. It wasn't unpleasant having my arms around her either. I felt a little stab of guilt, but hey, I was only borrowing her from Cliff for a little while, right?
Rudy?
Sylphie tilted her head curiously at me. Not that I was doing anything fishy. Really. I had to hold on tight so I wouldn't fall off, that was all. All right, everyone. See you soon. At last, our journey got underway. It took 5 days for us to reach the forest to the southwest of Sharia. During that first leg of the journey, we were accompanied by an adventurer we'd hired from the guild. He'd be responsible for taking our horse back to the city afterward. Horses would only slow you down in a dense forest, and we didn't know the size of the teleporter we'd be using. It would be convenient to have a beast of burden for our travels across the desert, but it was smarter to just procure one over there. We'd probably find something better suited to the local climate. All in all, it made more sense to have someone just escort the horse back to Sharia for us. He hadn't come cheap, so I had every intention of keeping him. I'd never learned how to ride, so I mostly spent the trip clinging to Elenice from behind. Of course, I did keep myself occupied in a perfectly platonic way. I spent an entire day charging up that magical diaper Cliff had created. This did involve wrapping my arms around Elenice's waist, so I caught our hired sword shooting me a few envious glances. After arriving at the forest, we said our goodbyes to Mitsukaze. Hopefully he'd hit it off with Aisha and the others. Now we had a forest to investigate. I forget exactly what its name was. Something like the Lumen Forest, maybe, a word that meant stomach in some language or the other. That choice made sense once you were inside the place. The vegetation was incredibly dense. There were so many tall old trees that their branches blocked out the sun.
Kind of a gloomy place, really. The ground was thick with roots, so it often felt like you were walking on top of a lumpy, uneven wooden floor. You had to watch your step constantly. The bigger trees had much larger roots, and in some places they even formed natural staircases of sorts. It was almost like an outdoor dungeon. Even an experienced ranger could easily get lost in a place like this. And once you wandered off the path, it would be all too easy to become a monster's prey, or to slip and fall off a wooden platform. Many human bodies had no doubt been digested by this forest over the centuries. It didn't look like any woodcutters came out here too often. Maybe the monsters here were relatively strong or numerous, or maybe there were other forests in the area that were just more conveniently located. It was probably some combination of the three, honestly. Just to be clear, the woodcutters of this world weren't anything to scoff at. A team of lumberjacks were often more organized and capable than an average band of adventurers. Forests offered plentiful lumber, but they were also home to many monsters. Cutting down a single tree was a dangerous task. People had to form teams, and sometimes even hire bodyguards. A typical expedition involved some serious combat on top of the actual woodcuttings, so the Woodcutters Guild was home to plenty of formidable characters. Besides, their work had a vital function in this world. If trees didn't get cut down on a regular basis, you'd eventually get swarms of dangerous treants.
You remember the formation we discussed earlier, Rudeus? Let's take our positions.
Got it. Still, this wasn't nothing for veteran adventurers like us. We were alert, of course, but calm. Elenise took the lead, and I followed behind her at a set distance. As you might expect from an elf, she knew how to navigate this terrain. And thanks to her excellent hearing, we had advance warning whenever enemies tried to ambush us.
3 monsters at 2 o'clock.
Got it. On command, I fired off a stone cannon ahead and to my right. The projectile struck a green board just as it broke through the foliage, sending it flying backward in a spray of blood. Its 2 companions immediately turned tail and fled. Elenise was handling the search part, and I was on destroy duty. So far, we were wiping out every threat before they even got close to us. We hadn't engaged in any real combat so far, which was fine by me. Elenise seemed to be guiding us around dangerous areas where animals were congregating in larger numbers. This was evidently a skill she'd picked up over the years, rather than some sort of natural elven instinct.
I think I found it. This is the monument we were looking for, right?
After some time, Elenise spotted the thing we were here to find. It was a flat stone slab with a symbol carved on its surface, standing in front of a thick wall of vegetation. I'd resigned myself to the possibility we'd be combing this forest for 2 or 3 days, but we'd managed to find the thing before the sun set. Maybe the woman had skill points and find secrets or something. The carving on the stone was familiar to me from the monuments to the 7 great powers. It bore the crest of the dragon god, a sharp, angular pattern made up mostly of triangles. It reminded me a little of the magic symbol that appeared on some anime character's forehead when he powered up, although the specific details were totally different. Maybe they were both supposed to be representations of a dragon's face. Still, had I seen this crest on its own before? Oh, right. It looked a lot like the symbol on those papers I'd found in the basement of my house. There were some subtle differences, but they were definitely similar. Maybe the man who created that killer robot had some connection to the dragon god? Well, there were probably a bunch of similar symbols out there. In my old world, lots of countries had similar flags.
Is something the matter?
Nah, it's nothing. Elenise had noticed me studying the symbol at length, but I decided not to pursue this line of thought any further. We had other priorities at the moment. I'll get started on removing the barrier then.
All right.
Elenise turned around to watch my back while I worked. I placed a hand on the stone surface and opened Nanahoshi's journal to the page where she'd written her notes. There was a specific incantation I was supposed to use. The worm lived only for his ideals. None could escape the reach of his mighty arms. He was the second to die, a dragon general, his scales green and gold, his life the most ephemeral of dreams. In the name of the holy dragon Emperor Sharad, I break his seal. The instant the final word left my mouth, I felt mana flowing from my arm into the tablet, and the world began to distort before my eyes. The air itself seemed to swirl strangely for a moment. When this passed, the thick wall of trees and plants in front of me had disappeared, leaving a stone building in its place.
Whoa!
I've never seen an enchantment like this.
It wasn't anything I'd seen before, either. But the way the tablet had sucked mana out of me was familiar. The thing was probably an oversized, stationary magical implement. If we broke it in half, we'd probably find a bunch of complex magic circles etched inside. Still, this incantation struck me as a dragon god original. What with all the, references to various dragons. That holy dragon Emperor Sharad guy was one of the 5 dragon generals from the old stories, right? This incantation seemed to be incomplete, given that it lacked the name of the spell itself. But if you had the entire thing, maybe it would allow you to imitate the power of this tablet and dispel magical barriers freely. It seemed disturbingly plausible. Let's get going then.
All right.
I kind of wanted to uproot this tablet and take it home with me, but that seemed like the sort of thing that might get me murdered by Orsted. I'd had enough of that for one lifetime. The building before us was a squat, single-story structure. Vines of ivy ran along its walls, and there were places where the stones had crumbled away over the years. The place looks like a pretty typical ancient ruin, doesn't it?
I've seen a few labyrinths with entrances that looked a bit like this. Oh, right. You don't have any experience with labyrinths, do you, Rudeus?
Nope. I've explored some old ruins and such, I guess, but not an actual labyrinth.
In that case, make sure you follow close behind me. Only step where I do.
Sure, I can do that. But, I don't think this place is a labyrinth, is it?
It's better to be safe than sorry.
Fair enough. There might be traps in there for all we knew. Still, Ellen Elise wasn't a rogue or anything. Was she even capable of finding traps? Just to be on the safe side, I activated my Eye of Foresight. It wasn't much of an advanced warning system, but it might help me cope a little better with any sudden ambushes.
Okay then, Rudeus, let's go. Be ready to cover me if things turn ugly.
Got it. Cautiously, Ellen Alice and I stepped inside the stone ruin together. The interior was also made of stone. Here and there, you could see vines or tree roots poking through the walls. A classic forest ruin situation, basically. It wasn't that large a structure, though. In fact, it looked like there were only 4 rooms. We moved through them slowly, making sure to investigate every corner. The 2 rooms nearest to the entrance were completely empty spaces about 7 square meters in size. The third had a small closet in one corner. When we opened the door, we found winter clothing in a man's size stored inside. These clearly hadn't been sitting here for decades. Somebody had changed their clothes here relatively recently. And by somebody, I mean Orsted. The teleportation circle was supposedly going to drop us in the middle of a desert, and this region was blanketed in heavy snows for a good part of the year. I had to imagine it would be hard to buy appropriate clothing for that weather in Bagarit, which was probably why he'd left these here for his next visit. If I'd known we could leave things behind like this, I could have carried a little more luggage. There was no point crying over spilled milk, though.
What's the matter? Is there some reason you're staring at those clothes?
Nah, just wondering if there's anything we could leave behind for our return trip.
I don't think so. We'd basically be throwing supplies away if we left them here.
To be sure, the food we had with us wasn't going to stay edible if we left it sitting here for months. Barrier or no barrier, there were probably bugs in here.
Let's be on our way then.
Right. In the 4th and final room, we found a set of stairs leading down into darkness.
Oh my. Now this looks suspicious.
Elle and I scrutinized the area around the stairs and checked every corner of the room like an RPG player clearing an area. I guess staircases were popular places to set traps.
Okay, then I think we're all right.
In the end, though, she didn't find anything. I wasn't too surprised. If someone wanted to trap this place, they'd probably have put a few at the entrance, too.
I'll head down first. Watch my back, Rudeus.
Got it. Ellen Elias took the stairs down very slowly and carefully. I made sure to follow exactly in her footsteps. Oddly, the ruins didn't get any darker as we descended. The reason for this became clear when we reached the bottom of the stairs. Well, there it is. There was a huge magic circle on the floor in front of us, as big as one of the rooms upstairs. In size, at least, it was comparable to the one I'd been trapped in back in the royal palace of Shironi, and it was emitting a steady bluish-white light. This would be the teleportation circle, then.
I'd have to assume so, yes.
Just to be sure, I took Nanahoshi's journal from my bag and reviewed her notes. The thing in front of us looked very similar to her sketch of a two-way teleporting circle. There were some minor differences, but all the major features were there. All we had to do was step into this thing, and we should theoretically find ourselves in the Begaric continent. Ellen Elias, however, seemed to be in no hurry to try it out. She was staring at the magic circle with a hesitant expression on her face. Something the matter, Ellen Elias?
I have some rather painful memories involving teleporting, that's all.
Painful memories? Was she talking about some incident from her days as an adventurer? Yeah, well, you're not the only one.
Ah, I suppose not.
Ellen Elias shook her head and looked at the magic circle again. This time, there was a grimly determined expression on her face. If this thing drops us in the middle of the ocean, let's make sure Nanahoshi regrets it.
All right, I'll hold her down while you jam it in.
Could we go with something less sexual?
Sexual? I didn't specify what you'd be jamming into where, dear. You could always just stick a finger into her nose or something. You've got a rather dirty mind.
Sticking your finger into a girl's nose still sounds kind of sexual to me, actually.
Does it really? I'll have to see if Cliff wants to try it later.
Don't blame me if he takes you up on that. Smiling, Ellen Elias took me by the hand. Her grip was strong. Despite her slender fingers, this was the hand of an adventurer. It was also a little warm and sweaty, and it made my heart start to beat a little faster. Of course, I had Sophie, and Ellen Elias had Cliff. If something happened between us, we'd both be committing adultery, and it wasn't like we had feelings for each other in that sense anyway.
I hope you're not misunderstanding, Rudeus. It's important for us to be in physical contact when we teleport, if we want to make sure it keeps us together.
Oh, right. Yeah, sorry about that. Whoops. That's kind of cringeworthy. I wasn't a virgin anymore, so I had no excuse to keep making these kinds of mistakes.
There I go again, seducing my granddaughter's husband without even trying to. It's simply criminal to be this beautiful, I suppose.
Yeah. Better atone for your misdeeds by filing for divorce.
Hey, come on, now you're just being rude.
That was better. If we turned the awkwardness into a joke, it diffused the sexual tension. Ellen Elias really knew how to handle these sorts of situations. Okay, then. Shall we go?
Let's do it.
The two of us stepped into the teleportation circle together. Chapter 10, Natural Predator. Teleporting felt a bit like snapping awake out of a doze. Maybe I'd actually lost consciousness for a moment. Looking beside me, I saw Ellen Elias was just as startled.
I guess we're here.
Well, maybe we were still standing in a stone ruin, just as we had been before, and the chamber didn't look particularly different at first glance. After a few seconds, though, I started to notice small piles of sand in the corners and a lack of vines on the walls. The stone was tinged a slightly browner color, too. We'd been teleported somewhere, all right. I stepped gingerly out of the magic circle. My body seemed to be functioning normally. I had my belongings, too, and I hadn't swapped minds with Ellen Elias or anything. Once we stepped completely out of the teleporter, it began to emit that bluish-white light once again. Apparently, it was ready and waiting to return us to the other side. That was convenient and all, but I didn't see any magic crystals powering this thing. How exactly was it getting the mana that it needed? Maybe it had a power source buried under the floor. What if it was somehow absorbing mana from the air around it? If there was a way to do that, I really wanted to know it. Oh wait, we should check to make sure we can get back to the other side, right?
That seems prudent, yes.
This was supposedly a two-way teleporter, but we had no way of knowing if it worked properly or had any limitations. If we'd taken a one-way trip out here, we'd need to hoof it back home the hard way. That would put an end to my plan to make it back before Sylphie gave birth. I guess I'll...
No, I'll go. If I'm not back in a few minutes, you can go on without me. I don't fancy the idea of telling Paul that you disappeared because of a malfunctioning teleporter.
Well, all right then. I'll leave it to you. It didn't matter that much either way at this point. I wasn't even sure we were on the right continent yet, for one thing.
Okay, sit tight.
Elenalis hopped back into the magic circle and abruptly disappeared. I thought I caught a brief glimpse of her being sucked down into the floor. This was my first time actually seeing someone get teleported. Come to think of it, did these things move you through the ground somehow? For the moment, there wasn't much to do but wait. I trusted Nanahoshi's memory, and from what she said, you didn't need some magic incantation or special technique to use these things properly. There was a chance Orsted had used some sort of magical implement, but we'd made out here easily enough. I wanted to think the return trip would be just as smooth. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 15. She's sure taking her time. Just as I was beginning to get concerned, Elenias finally showed up again. It was like watching the teleport happen in reverse. She popped up out of the floor in a fraction of a second. She looked a bit woozy for a moment, but nodded when she met my gaze.
We're all right, Rudeus. It works just fine.
Really? I was starting to get worried. It took longer than I expected.
What? I didn't spend more than a few seconds on the other side.
The teleportation process wasn't literally instant then, but a few minutes to take a trip halfway across the world wasn't a bad deal. It sounded like we were looking at maybe 7 minutes of lag per trip. Come to think of it, I'd heard something about the fit-tone displacement incident that seemed relevant. There had supposedly been an odd delay between the disappearances and when people reappeared elsewhere. Was it Sylphie who told me that? Teleportation might be a rapid means of travel, but it wasn't instantaneous. Maybe it was more like a boson jump. Well, no big deal. You made it back, and that's what matters. If these things were too dangerous, Orsted wouldn't be using them, and we'd at least confirmed that we could get back home. Shall we be on our way then? Feeling somewhat reassured, I made my way over to the stone stairs leading upward. The instant we reached the first floor, I noticed a sharp increase in the temperature. The air was brutally hot. It didn't feel too humid at least, which made sense if we were in the middle of a desert, like we were supposed to be. The first floor looked virtually identical to the ruin we'd left behind in the forest. The main difference was the sand carpeting the floors and the lack of vegetation on the walls. I noticed a few footprints here and there. Those were Orsted's, presumably. If we bumped into each other, I'd have to grovel at his feet faster than he could kill me. There were 4 rooms here as well, and the layout was identical. In one of them, however, we found a few thick white capes and water canteens. More of Orsted's possessions, presumably. What should we do about our footsteps? Think I should erase them?
Are you worried about that Orsted person? I think it's rather unlikely that we'll run into him.
True, but I was still kind of scared. Maybe I should leave behind a message? Tell him Nanahoshi had told me about this place and I was only using it because of a family emergency? Promise to keep it secret and beg him not to be angry with me. Then again, there was no telling when he'd even be here next. He might never find out we'd been here in the first place, in which case leaving a letter would just be asking for trouble. After a few moments, I decided not to bother. We took some time to look through the ruin just in case, but there wasn't anything else of note. Orsted wasn't lurking on the premises either, of course. After exploring the ruin thoroughly, we set foot outside for the first time. It was hot out there. Very hot. The word hot was kind of inadequate, to be honest. The wind actually hurt my face. All I saw in front of me was a sea of rolling sand dunes. It looked like one of the pictures I'd seen of the Sahara back in my previous life. The sun was already starting to set. Wasn't it better to travel at night in the desert, though? Wait, no. Maybe it was more dangerous because the temperature would drop below freezing? Not that things necessarily work the same in this world, I seem to remember that desert-dwelling monsters were more active at night. If we wandered around in the dark and got ambushed, things could get dicey. What do you think we should do, Elenilis?
We won't get far before the sun sets if we set out now. It's a little early, but I think we ought to take the chance to rest with a roof over our heads.
We ended up deciding to spend the night in the ruins. The night proved just as frigid as I'd feared. I'd gotten used to cold up in the north, but the rapid way the temperature shifted here made it harder to endure. We were okay for the moment since we had thick stone walls to shelter behind, but we'd have to think about how to stay warm when we were camping outdoors. Maybe I could make us some temporary shelter with magic? Earth Fortress was a nice spell for that, but you had to keep feeding it mana or it would crumble. If I tinkered with it a little, maybe I could create a simple igloo-style structure that would hold itself together. Then we could make a fire inside to warm ourselves up. Yeah, that seemed like a plan. For tonight, though, we decided to just wrap ourselves up in our sleeping bags on the floor. I took some time to recharge Elenalise's magical implement before turning in. This involved putting both my hands on the diaper to channel mana into it. I felt like a bit of an idiot, to be honest.
Rudeus, if you find yourself running out of mana, you can put off recharging this thing for a while.
But if I stop feeding it mana, you won't be able to contain yourself, right?
Your magic is going to be crucial every time we enter combat. We have to prioritize your ability to fight.
The monsters on the Greyrat continent weren't, on average, as fierce as those on the demon continent. But some were supposedly of comparable strength. Letting down our guard might prove fatal. Don't worry about it. This isn't much of a strain on my mana supply, honestly.
Really? I swear, your mana's like a bottomless well.
Kind of like your sex drive.
Oh, I wouldn't say I'm that horny, dear.
If I slacked off on filling this thing up with mana and Elenise went into seductress mode, we'd be in trouble. I probably wouldn't be able to resist if she attacked me. There were too many convenient excuses available. Just this once. It'll be our little secret. I tried to stop her, but she forced the issue. And if I gave in to that kind of pressure, it might end up ruining our lives. I mean, what if she got pregnant? Cliff would hate me for the rest of my life, and Sophie might never forgive me either. Not to mention what my little sisters might think. I just couldn't imagine a single good thing coming of me sleeping with Elenilis. If we really couldn't stop ourselves, maybe I could at least convince her to stop at oral... No, I shouldn't even be thinking like that. I was obviously a little backed up myself at this point. I'd been spending a lot of time over the last week with my arms wrapped around Elenilis. We hadn't done anything remotely sexual, but you can't blame a young guy for getting a little horny. I'd have to see to my own needs tonight when I was on guard duty or something.
Well, let's go to sleep, shall we? I imagine we'll be moving through this desert for some time, so we ought to be saving our strength.
Yeah, you're right. Much as I wanted to conserve my energy, though, I needed to expend some tonight. Sometimes it isn't easy being a man. Later that night, as I was lying inside the ruins, a sweet smell wafted through the air. Instantly, I felt my heart start pounding in my chest. Opening my eyes, I saw Elenilis grimacing in her sleep, with her sword clutched in her arms. I found myself studying her pale neck and slender hands. Her face looked a bit like a more grown-up version of Sylphie's. She was tall and willowy too. Especially below the waist, her figure was about as perfect as I'd ever seen. And wasn't she supposedly really good in the sack too? All of a sudden, my log had grown into a towering oak, and my thoughts were clouded with desire. Elenilis wriggled around in her sleep. Her blanket slipped off, and I got a good look at her thighs and tight leather shorts. The woman had a nice butt. I wanted to give it a squeeze. Without consciously meaning to, I reached out. I wanted to touch her very badly. My fingers reached her thighs. They really were amazingly slender. Elenice let out a little sound and parted her legs slightly. Was she trying to seduce me or what? It felt increasingly impossible for me to stop myself. Why did it matter anyway? We could make it a one-time thing. She wasn't going to refuse me. She'd keep it to herself. It wouldn't be a problem.
Cliff,
But then she murmured that name in her sleep, and I came to my senses. Turning around, I crawled out of the room on all fours, then fled outside the building entirely. I'd thought I was still okay for now, but I'd obviously been neglecting my body's needs for way too long. I'd nearly gotten carried away by a momentary surge of lust. It was past time for me to blow off some steam, if you know what I mean. Sitting down on top of a nearby sand dune, I started to lower my pants, and then heard a noise. I wasn't alone out here. Had Ellen Elise followed me outside? Looking around me, I spotted a very sexy woman standing not too far away. It was freezing cold out here, but she was dressed up like a dancing girl. Her clothes were skimpy enough that they'd probably be transparent in the light of day. She had short curly hair, probably black in color. It was hard to make out her skin tone in the darkness, but her body shone palely against the inky sky. More importantly, she had a nice body. Curves in all the right places, you know? She made Ellen Elise look like a plank of wood. The woman put a finger to her mouth and licked it seductively. I found myself staring, transfixed at her lips. Slowly, patiently, she walked over to me, and then she crouched down, slowly spreading her legs apart. The sweet smell I'd caught a whiff of earlier flooded into the air, far more powerful than before. It hit me like a tidal wave. I swallowed loudly. There was something warm running down my chin. When I touched my face, I found I had a nosebleed.
The
woman reached out her hand invitingly to me. I accepted it and let her draw me forward onto
Rudeus!
In that instant, there was a shout from inside the ruins. The woman jumped backward. A split second later, Ellen Elise slashed her sword through the air where she'd been. Before I could react, Ellen Elise had positioned herself between me and my seductress.
Get a hold of yourself, stupid.
Huh? I didn't know how to react, but Ellen was already raising her shield and charging at the woman.
Okay.
The woman let out a high-pitched shriek, and her nails grew to an unnatural length. Her body itself was changing shape. Fully formed wings burst from her back, and she beat them fiercely, trying to lift off the ground. Ellen Elise was already on her. Swinging her shield sharply into the woman's face, she sent her crashing to the ground. And once she had the thrashing woman pinned in place with her foot, she stabbed her sword down.
Giles.
The woman let out one final eerie cry, but Ellen Elise just pushed the blade deeper. After a moment, she jumped backward. The woman twitched and spasmed a few times, but soon stopped moving. She was dead. Huh. I looked on in a state of shock. My mind didn't want to make sense of these events, and my little guy still hadn't gone back to normal yet. What the hell? What just happened? As I sat there stupefied, Ellen Elise turned around and slapped me in the face.
Wake up already! That thing was a succubus.
Huh? A succubus? Wait, really? That dead thing lying on the ground had looked like a normal woman to me, albeit one with giant bat wings and weirdly long claws. Oh, now that I looked more closely, her skin was actually bright blue, and her face wasn't quite human either. She did have a really nice body, though, before she died at least. Maybe I could still cop a feel.
Yes, this is the first one I've ever seen, but I'm positive. I guess that foul stench they omit wasn't just an urban legend.
What foul stench! It had struck me as a nice fragrance, actually, and kind of arousing. But anyway, I found myself staring at Ellen Elise again. She didn't have much of a chest, but her face was gorgeous, and her legs were shapely. And that butt, my God! Ellen Elise, you've got a really nice body, you know.
What? Rudeus? Pull yourself together, please.
It was no big deal, right? The woman loved sleeping around. If I complimented her enough, she'd let me in her pants. You know, I've always dreamed about making love to a girl like you.
I'll tell Sylphie if you keep this up.
Hey, what she doesn't know can't hurt her. Rising to my feet, I started to walk slowly toward Elenilis. She raised her shield and backed away from me.
Damn, that's right. Succubi can be witchmen, can't they?
Come on, babe. Let's have some fun. Mushoku Tensei Vol11 by Rifujinama Gonat, cast by RTL Studio. If you are interested in creating your own audio drama like this, please visit rtail.ai and use promotion code RTAIL to activate your account. Now, enjoy the story. Elenilis frowned, then sighed, and then smacked her shield into my face. I fell back hard onto the sand, bright lights flashing before my eyes. That didn't matter, though. I had more important things to worry about, like having sex with Elenilis. Haha, come on, babe. You won't regret it, I promise.
Oh, good lord. Rudeus, use detoxification magic on yourself. And keep using it until you count to 10.
Detoxification magic? If I do that, will you let me screw you?
We'll figure that out later. Just do it, all right?
Panting loudly, I started to cast my detoxification spells, beginning with the most basic and working my way up to the intermediate incantations. After I'd completed a few of those, though, my body suddenly felt a lot lighter. Huh? It was as if the fog inside my head had lifted all at once. My lower body was still a little overactive, but my desperate need for sex was already fading away. I looked over at Elenilis. She was an attractive woman, to be sure, but those were my only thoughts.
I did hear that the scent of the succubus has the ability to drive men out of their minds. I see that part was true as well. Good grief.
Elenilis slowly sheathed her sword, then folded her arms with a sigh. What was I even doing up until a moment ago? I searched my memory for the words I'd spoken over the last few minutes. Shit.
Let's go back to sleep, shall we? And do try to be a little more careful next time.
Elenilis was already turning around to return to the ruins. Fidgeting awkwardly in embarrassment, I called out to her. Miss Elenilis, I'm very sorry about all that. Elenilis looked back at me suspiciously, but then grinned in amusement at the look on my face.
What was that line again? I've always dreamed about making love to a girl like you.
I could feel my face heating up. It wasn't my fault. The succubus made me do it.
Come on, babe.
Oh, Gage. God damn it, this was seriously humiliating. Smirking, Elenilis walked over to me and thumped me on the head.
It's all right, I understand. The thing has that effect on people, you know? It's hardly your fault. I won't tell Sylphie or Paul about this.
You're a saint, Elenilis.
Just try not to trust me too blindly, all right? I can control myself for the moment, but my curse will only grow stronger with time. At some point, I won't be able to hold back.
Yeah, okay? If it happens, it happens.
No, stupid. You're supposed to stop me if it comes to that.
Right. Shaking her head, Elenilis smiled gently.
I guess I'll be going to sleep then. You stay on guard duty for now, please. Oh, and make sure you burn that body.
Got it. With that, she walked back inside the ruin. I still couldn't help feeling guilty about the way I'd treated her. But there wasn't much I could do about it now. I needed to burn the succubus's body and bury its bones. Up close, it wasn't quite as attractive. Its features were kind of bat-like, actually. I guess it looked human enough if you squinted, but I couldn't understand why I'd been so turned on by it before. I could have sworn it looked like a beautiful girl at first. Maybe it only revealed its real form when its true nature was exposed, like vampires in horror movies. Still, I hadn't been imagining that figure. The creature's body was voluptuous, all right. Maybe that was the real problem. From the neck down, it was like a much bustier version of Elenilis with wings. Okay, let's try to get our mind off this subject. This had been a very close call. If Elenilis hadn't come leaping out in the nick of time, what would have become of me? Maybe this thing would have taken me by the hand, lured me out somewhere, and sucked the life right out of me. Ugh, damn it. I still got a bad case of the blue balls. Just another reason to resent this thing. At this rate, I really might throw myself on Elenile's before too long. Maybe I should relieve myself before I go back in there, keeping an eye out for succubi, of course. It was only our first night on the Begarit continent, and this journey was already proving to be a real challenge. Chapter 11, The Desert Ecosystem. Our journey across the desert began the next morning. The attack by that succubus had at least woken me up to the dangers we were facing here. I'd spent the last few years in a nice, safe university town, and it might have dulled my instincts. They hadn't been that sharp to begin with, but I'd definitely gotten a bit too relaxed about things. We were on the Begarit continent now. This place wasn't nearly as safe as the central continent. I needed to get my head in the game, or I was going to get us both killed. Let's try to stay covered up for now. Make sure you keep yourself hydrated too. Let me know if your canteen runs dry.
Of course.
The two of us were wearing coats and had hoods over our heads. Exposing any skin could be dangerous out here. If we brought Cliff along, I had a feeling he would have been complaining about being so bundled up in this heat. Although we were in the middle of a desert, I could refill our water supply with magic whenever it was necessary. Still, neither I nor Elenilis had any experience with this kind of terrain, and there was no telling what we'd find on the road ahead of us. There was a risk I'd get heat stroke and find myself unable to use any spells at all, for instance. We had to play this carefully.
Shall I set our course due north then?
Yeah, please do. Nanahoshi's map indicated that the nearest town lay in that direction, although it was rough at best. Eleni's didn't need a compass to orient us, a relatively well-known elven ability. They never lost their sense of direction, even in forests so thick you couldn't see the sun. With that ability, along with the skills she'd picked up over the years, I was confident she would keep us on track regardless of any obstacles we encountered. Come to think of it, I'd met quite a few people who could find their way through tricky terrain using nothing but a basic map. I guess it was a skill you developed with enough practice.
It really is hot out here, though.
I could try to whip up a rainstorm around us if you want.
Let's not, dear. It would probably attract hordes of monsters.
Desert animals were always on the lookout for sources of water. The thought reminded me of the hordes of lizards that had emerged during the rainy season in the Great Forest. Still, I'd heard it said that the monsters on this continent couldn't endure cold. If we ever got swarmed, I could try freezing the air all around us, as long as I could do it without accidentally hurting Elenilis. For now, though, I just followed along behind her. This was my first time walking in a desert. It felt like my feet were sinking into the ground with every step. Fortunately, I'd gotten used to moving through the snow up in the Northern Territories. This wasn't exactly the same, but my ability to step lightly still came in handy. I felt like I could keep it up all day without getting too worn out. This initial optimism proved to be a bit misguided, though. Only a few hours later, I found myself growing increasingly exhausted. The sun beating down on us was the main issue, that and the scorching winds that kept blowing in my face. I could tell my temperature was elevated and I was starting to feel a little dizzy. I was rehydrating as often as I could, but that sense of fatigue was still building fast. Maybe I ought to have summoned up a cloud or two above us after all. In comparison, Eleni's was still in surprisingly good shape.
You don't have as much stamina as I expected, Rudeus.
The sand isn't that much of a problem since I'm used to walking through the snow, but this heat is really brutal.
To be fair, I suppose Cliff or Zenoba would have collapsed by now. It was the right call not to bring them along.
It never ceased to amaze me how monstrously tough the warriors of this world were. Maybe this unnatural stamina had something to do with that battle aura thing too. I was more than a little jealous. In any case, this heat was bad news. It felt like the sweat was vaporizing before it could even trickle down my face. Up in the Northern Territories, cold had been the major problem. Back then, I could generate a pocket of heat around me using magic, a practical application of the spell burn in place. Maybe there was a variation that would make this place more tolerable.
Oh, that's nice and cool. Did you do something, Rudeus?
Yeah, I'm trying to lower the temperature around us, just a little. After a little trial and error, I managed to cool things down by about 5 degrees Celsius. It was still brutally hot, though. The sun was just too powerful. I had a thick hood on, but it still felt like the top of my head was on fire. Maybe we should have brought parasols or something. For now, I supplemented my cooling spell by magically freezing the water inside one of my canteens and slipping it inside my clothing. I could just freeze it again when the ice melted. These adjustments made things a bit more tolerable. I wasn't comfortable, but I could withstand the heat. We encountered multiple monsters that first day. The first creature we ran into was a giant scorpion, perhaps 2 meters in length. Its tail was split in two, and it could lash both sides around independently of the other. Elenilas told me afterward that it was called the Twin Death Scorpion. Its sting delivered a very dangerous poison that could only be cured by intermediate-level detoxification magic, which made me glad I'd taken the time to learn that tier. The creature had a relatively tough carapace, but it wasn't too nimble. Elenilas pinned it in place, and I shot it dead with a stone cannon in about 2 seconds. The thing was supposedly a B-rank monster, but it posed no threat at all to us. We worked well together. If Elenilas had been here on her own, though, she might have had a harder time. I wasn't sure if her attacks could do much damage to a heavily armored enemy.
Those things certainly are large, aren't they?
I don't know. It seemed normal enough to me.
Well, it was about the same size as the monsters on the Demon Continent, wasn't it?
Yeah, I guess you're right. The monsters of the Greyrat continent weren't supposed to be comparable to those of the Demon Continent. It was a bit odd that the first one we encountered was so large. I'd been expecting something maybe half this size.
Maybe the scorpions are just unusually big.
Sure, maybe. Sometimes you just run into the most dangerous monsters right off the bat, don't you?
Not particularly often, I'd say.
Maybe the monsters in this area are just on the stronger side then.
That seems a bit more likely.
Still, we kept moving at our usual pace. The next monster we encountered was a Trent, a common foe this time. This one was a spiky green cactus Trent rather than a walking tree. It was a C-rank monster capable of shooting needles at its enemies and using basic earth magic. But once again, it didn't pose us much of a challenge.
It's almost reassuring to run into a treant, isn't it?
Elenilas wiped off her blade after we were done. I guess so. They really are everywhere, aren't they? Almost like slimes.
Slimes? But those only live deep inside caves.
Sorry, just ignore me. Anyway, it's too bad the ones out here are cacti, not trees. We can't exactly use their bodies for firewood.
Yes, they're far too saturated with water, I'd imagine. That might be helpful in its own right, but we already have our magic.
By now, Annihiless could use basic water magic spells herself. I'd assumed she was skipping all her classes, but I guess she managed to learn what she needed to. The next threat arrived suddenly and without warning.
We're under attack!
Elamai shouted, leaping back to my side. A split second later, something gigantic burst up out of the ground just ahead of where she'd been standing. It was a worm, an extremely large worm, maybe a meter thick and at least 5 meters long. It let out a strange barking sound in midair, then plunged back into the sand and disappeared.
Good Lord! That startled me.
What was that thing, Elenilas?
A sandworm, I suppose. A very large one.
Sandworms were monsters that sat waiting patiently under the sand, then burst up to attack when prey happened to pass nearby. I'd never seen one before, but apparently there were similar creatures in the Great Forest. Their sizes differed greatly, though. The forest-dwelling ones were only about 20 to 30 centimeters thick, and they could maybe bite off your leg at worst.
I hear they have big ones in the Demon Continent as well. You've never seen one?
Most of the monsters I ran into there were just snakes and wolves. Oh, that and some weird walking armor thing.
Walking armor? What was this? A soul breaker?
Nah, they called it an executioner. It's the one with the big sword.
Those are a stronger variety. You don't want to run into one of them when you're on your own.
It seemed the sandworms here were unusually large, too. I caught a glimpse of 5 meters of its body, but the rest was still underground. It might be as much as 10 meters long in total. That made them large enough to swallow a man whole. If you happened to wander over one without noticing, it was the equivalent of stepping on an instant death trap. Still, they didn't pose much danger as long as you could avoid their initial attack. I churned the ground where the sandworm was rooted, chopping it up with blades of hardened sand. It died without even a shriek. A small puddle of fluid formed around the part of its body that had burst from the surface. If they've got caterpillars that big around here, I wonder what the butterflies are like.
Maybe that's what they call the succubi. They're a bit like butterflies of the night, aren't they?
Does that mean you started off as a bug yourself, Elenilis?
Well, we all have our awkward early years, you know.
So she wasn't denying that she was a succubus. Now, I was curious about her caterpillar years, though. Was she hanging around the school library with a big pair of dorky glasses? Working the fields in a pair of dirty overalls? Either way, I had the feeling Cliff would get really excited if he could see a photo. It always tickles a man's heart to see an unexpected side of a girl he loves. The last monsters we met that day were a group of ants. We spotted them after crossing over a particularly large sand dune. The next instant, Elenilis threw me down to the ground. We ended up sliding halfway back down the hill we just climbed. Hey! What are you doing?
That's an army of phalanx ants.
That didn't mean much to me, but I followed Elenilis' lead, slowly crawling back up the dune. This involved staring at her butt for quite a while, always a sight for sore eyes. Would Sylphie end up rounding out like this in a few years? Her butt was beautiful just the way it was, but I wouldn't mind getting more of it.
Be quiet, Rudeus. We don't want to provoke them.
Pressing ourselves flat against the slope of the hill, we peered out over the crest at the phalanx ants below bright red creatures, marching along in an orderly formation. Each ant was maybe 30 centimeters to a meter in size. Some were on the larger side of that spectrum, and others were noticeably smaller. They also came in different shapes. I saw a few with wings, and even some who had oddly human-looking lower bodies. Despite the variations in their ranks, the creatures were marching single-mindedly toward the same destination. It was basically a river of oversized army ants down there. The line stretched as far as the eye could see on either side. I couldn't even begin to guess how many of them there were.
Given their size and numbers, that's definitely an S-rank threat.
Wow, really? Mind explaining? I'm a little curious.
Phalanx ants are one of the most dangerous monsters out there. They're known for their insatiable appetite and their ability to consume anything in their path. Those ones are particularly massive, too. They must be a species unique to this continent.
It seemed phalanx ants were mutant versions of a more typical species of army ants. Unlike other ants, they didn't establish static colonies, but spent their lives in constant motion, eating everything in their path. They did have a number of natural predators, but their sheer numbers made them capable of overwhelming any terrestrial foes, even stray dragons. At certain intervals, they would pause their journey to make a temporary nest where they bred, replenishing their numbers with the next generation, similar to the behavior of normal army ants. However, since these were monsters rather than normal animals, they were smarter and more aggressive than the species they'd developed from. If we started strolling casually along the dune, they would swarm us in the blink of an eye, even if we weren't aggressive toward them.
None of the individual ants are that powerful. Those ones down there are probably E rank. Maybe D or C for the larger ones.
Well, C ranks nothing to scoff at. And from the looks of things, there were thousands and thousands of them. The danger a monster posed wasn't evaluated in a vacuum anyway. You had to consider their tendency to move in groups. Even D or C rank monsters would be a rank A threat if you got a dozen of them together. In a group of thousands, they'd definitely be a high S. I'd played a few video games in my old life where you battled ants 3 times the size of a human being, but there was no real need for them to be this big, especially considering how quick and powerful monsters were for their size.
That must be the queen.
Elenilis pointed out a particularly large ant among the crowd. It was at least 2 meters in length and had the upper body of a female human. Reminded me a bit of a boss in an old RPG I'd played once. In my old world, even the queen army ants were maybe 15 millimeters in size. These things had to be, 50 times larger? That was scary, all right? There were lots of monsters that traveled in large groups here, and they tended to be very good at working together in battle. If I threw out an attack spell, they'd probably form up into perfect Roman army formations and charge me from all sides. For all we knew, there might even be some with long-range or magical attacks. Maybe we'd stand a chance if I used some massive spell to hit all of them at once? No. If I tried to hurl a nuke that big, it would probably end up hitting us as well.
Rudeus? Why do you look like you're getting ready to fight?
What? I'm not.
Well, you're clearly thinking about how you'd try to kill them.
Was it really written that clearly on my face? What was I, some kind of battle-hungry barbarian? Sorry. I was just thinking about how to get away if they noticed us.
All right then, but we're just gonna sit here and wait until the whole army marches past, you understand?
Right. It wasn't like I was going to get any XP for smashing my way through 500,000 killer ants. Their body parts might be worth something as a raw material, but I couldn't imagine dragging those heavy carapaces around in this brutal heat. And our objective was to make it to Rapan as soon as possible, not to make a name for ourselves as ant slayers. This was basically a scouting mission. I needed to remember that. It took about an hour of waiting, but eventually the massive army of ants finished marching past our position. In the desert, the sun turned red as it set. The sand began to glow crimson, and pools of shadow formed underneath the dunes, transforming the scene from a monotonous sandy brown into a striking pattern of vivid red and blacks. It felt like we'd stepped into a different world. Still, a desert was a desert. The Sahara back in my old world had probably looked like this in the evening as well. The temperature's going down fast. We might be able to make more progress in the night, honestly.
I suppose you're right. Let's keep moving for now then.
Sure, As we were speaking, I heard something flittering through the air nearby. Looking up, I spotted a group of bats about 50 centimeters in length. They were flapping around loudly and circling the area. I hadn't noticed any of these during the day. They probably came out at night to feed on bugs or lizards.
Those are giant bats, Rudeus.
Oh, they're monsters?
A borderline case, but they move in groups. We should be careful.
As a monster, the giant bat was probably an F-rank threat, or maybe E-rank if you got a large enough swarm of them. They didn't have much in the way of offense or magical powers and weren't aggressive toward humans. The main issue seemed to be that all the flapping could get kind of annoying. Huh? Wait, what's the matter with these things? For some reason, though, these ones were flocking around Elenialize. They didn't seem to be attacking her, but they had her all but surrounded. Were those all males, maybe?
Hey, Rudeus, don't just watch. Help me.
Yeah, sure. Nimble as Elenialize was, she couldn't very well keep moving with a wall of bats surrounding her. I'd have to knock them all away with a little tornado or something. But just as I was preparing to cast my spell, I noticed one particularly large silhouette inside the swarm of bats. It was a humanoid figure with bat wings, and it was skipping toward us in a weirdly slinky way, and there was a hint of something sweet in the air. It was a succubus. Oh, crap! Stone cannon! I smacked my big hard rock right into the little seductress. Grimacing in agony, she clutched at her stomach and hopped backward, then turned to flee. I'd unconsciously dialed back the spell to a non-lethal level. It was hard for me to kill something that looked so human. It was time to face the facts. I was not cut out to be a succubus exterminator. I couldn't bring myself to kill the things, and whenever I got a good whiff of their scent, or their pheromones, or whatever, I sort of lost my grip on reality. If I ever found myself in close combat against one, they'd beat me easily. Of course, as long as I had the benefit of distance, I could take them out with a single stone cannon shot. If I could see them coming, they weren't a threat. In terms of combat ability, a succubus was probably the equivalent of an E-rank monster, but it was usually classified as a C-rank instead. Its ability to mesmerize made it powerful. Good thing I wasn't a virgin anymore. If I didn't have those sweet memories of my nights with Sylphie to fall back on, I wouldn't stand a chance against those things. Even in my previous life, I had a soft spot for succubi. The ones in that world tended to wear a ton of makeup, but that was fine, as long as they never let you see what was really underneath the paint. You just had to let yourself believe the illusion. Long story short, it wasn't my fault if I got really horny and grabbed Elenilis from behind after we cleared out the last of the giant bats. I was a victim of the circumstances.
Hey, Rudeus, get a hold of yourself. Use that detoxification spell already. Gah, stop rubbing yourself against me.
Come on, please. Just a little? I won't even put it in all the way. Why don't I just use the back entrance? That doesn't count as cheating, right?
Stop being such an idiot.
Gah! My persistent groping was answered with a vicious shield chop. If Elenilis was a character in a visual novel, they'd probably call her a childishly violent heroine on the internet. Not that she wasn't fully justified, of course. In any case, the pain restored my sanity somewhat, and I used my detoxification spell. Ha! Sorry for the hassle, Elenilis.
That's all right. It's the monster's fault, not yours.
Man, it really hurts where she smacked me. She swings that thing like a club.
Honestly, I hope we've seen the last of those awful creatures. Now you've got me all worked up.
Smacking her flushed cheeks, Elenilis shook her head vigorously. My mating rituals had apparently done some damage this time. It was the succubus's fault at the end of the day, but that didn't matter. She'd been justified in hitting me. My jaw was going to be aching for a while, but these things happen. Those bats seemed like they were under the succubus's control, didn't they?
Yeah, I guess so.
The central continent had monsters that commanded weaker monsters as well. The first monster I'd ever seen in this world was one of them, in fact. What was it called again? I'd only seen it that once, so it had slipped my mind. Some kind of boar-like creature that walked on two legs. Apparently, the succubi could control swarms of giant bats in the same way. When they saw men and women traveling together, they'd order the bats to attack the women and take that opportunity to seduce the males. They brought the men back to their lairs, where they'd wring them dry and then literally eat them. I could take the things down at a distance with a single attack, but a swordsman or warrior used to melee combat would probably be in deep trouble. How could you possibly deal with that scent up close? The longer the fight lasted, the harder it would be to focus. Even the most pure-hearted of knights would eventually fall to their knees. Gay men were probably the only people who stood a fighting chance.
What is it this time?
Not long after our battle with the succubus, a two-legged lizard that resembled a velociraptor popped up over a nearby sand dune. More quickly followed, and soon they were moving toward us. They weren't especially large, but there were more than a dozen of them. A few made an immediate beeline for the fallen giant bats and started to feed on them.
I've never seen these things before.
Elenilis raised her shield warily. I also readied my staff and watched the creatures carefully. I'm surprised. I thought you knew about every creature out there, Elenilis.
I'm not a professional monster researcher, you know.
For once, Elenilis couldn't rattle off the name of the enemy we were facing. That probably meant it was a species only found on the Begarit continent. When they spotted us, the raptors hissed loudly, and a few jumped to attack. It looked like they were trying to protect their meal more than anything else. Not that they'd really earned it, considering that we'd killed the bats. The raptors were quick and they had sharp claws, but they weren't particularly dangerous. The two of us took out 7 of them in a few seconds, cutting their numbers to about 10. The survivors, realizing the danger they were in, backed away from us warily. It seemed easiest to mop up the survivors with a single big earth spell, but...
Rudeus, be careful! Something huge is coming!
A group of larger monsters had been sneaking up on us during the fight. They were giant chickens, maybe 5 meters in height, basically feathered dinosaurs. Their crests were an eye-searingly bright shade of red. Apparently, these things were natural predators of the velociraptors. The pack immediately assaulted the lizards, killing most of them and sending the others fleeing frantically. The chickens consumed their victims violently on the spot.
That's got to be a variety of Garuda.
On its own, a Garuda was considered a C-rank monster.
but those that moved in packs were usually classified as B-rank threats. These ones were unusually large to boot. We were probably in A-rank territory here. Since their battle with the raptors was happening some distance from us, though, the oversized chickens were content to throw a few threatening cries at us, rather than attacking. The few surviving lizards were still desperately trying to escape, but they wouldn't last long at this rate. And once the Garuda finished eating them, they'd probably turn on us next. We might be able to handle them, but...
Let's get out of here while the getting's good, Rudeus. Something even bigger is coming.
Elenice's sharp senses had already picked up on a truly massive predator approaching from behind the monstrous chickens. Got it. As we retreated, Elenice managed to grab one of the smaller raptor corpses to take with us. It would probably make better eating than the bats. After putting some distance between us and the site of our battle with the raptors, we found a quiet spot to make a temporary shelter. This would be where we spent the rest of our... Rather than relying on our provisions, we decided to cook and eat the dead raptor that very night. We still had plenty of food, but any adventurer worth their salt tried to supplement their supplies when they could. Today had taught us that the desert was a very different place at night. Once the sun went down, the monsters had just kept coming. If we'd stopped to fight the Garuda, we'd probably have found ourselves facing down a new threat only minutes later. Elenice speculated that the succubus's pheromones had attracted the other creatures to that spot. The scent was sweet to males and intolerably foul to females. It was hard to say if that applied to monsters too, but perhaps they'd learned that there was prey to be found when they followed that odor. And of course, the succubi targeted human males, which meant that groups of people would naturally attract swarms of monsters in this desert. The first succubus we'd encountered hadn't brought any giant bats or other creatures with it, but there had been a magical barrier protecting that area. Maybe that succubus had just managed to slip inside alone somehow. Oh, crap. What if it was a friend of Orsted's or something? Nah, that can't be right. It wouldn't have just attacked me in that case. It would have asked if I knew him or something, right? Hold on, though. What if it was all just a big cultural misunderstanding? What if that was just how a succubus said hello? In Japan, people like to get to know someone by taking a bath with them. Foreigners could never seem to wrap their heads around that one. Maybe this was something similar. That would be really unfortunate then. I might have accidentally killed an old friend of Orsted's. Was it too late for us to go back and dig her a grave or something? Maybe he'd be less outraged if he saw we'd shown her some respect. No. If he posted a guardian out there, Nanahoshi would have mentioned it. And thanks to his curse, most people instinctively hated Orsted. That probably applied to humanoid monsters, too. It was probably just a coincidence, all things considered.
I must say the Bigaric continent's not much like what I envisioned.
Elenice's yawn echoed inside our little shelter. I envied her ability to relax. Maybe she'd be a little less carefree if she had any idea what Orsted was like. Still, I was just overthinking things at this point. We couldn't start worrying about whether every monster we encountered was actually somebody's friend. The thing had tried to eat me. We'd fought back to protect ourselves. It was that simple. Pushing this unproductive line of thought away, I turned to reply. Yeah, I guess so. There's a lot more monsters than I expected. In terms of the encounter rate, this place seemed even worse than the Demon Continent. Hopefully we hadn't screwed up and landed ourselves on the Divine Continent by mistake or anything.
Well, we're managing all right for now, and that's what matters.
Sure, doesn't mean we can get careless, though.
I don't need you to tell me that, dear. Still, if we can keep doing what we did today, we should be able to deal with anything that attacks us.
Just make sure you're ready to deal with it if a succubus gets me again, okay?
How about you be a little more careful?
Our first day in the desert was finally over. It had felt more like a week, honestly. We had a long road ahead of us. Chapter 12, Traversing the Sands. Our second day on the road proved no less eventful. In fact, we ran into even more monsters. For how barren this desert looked, it was crawling with critters. The sandworms were particularly nasty. They didn't pose a real threat if you stayed alert and spotted them ahead of time, but sometimes you just had other things demanding your attention, like monsters, for example. At one point, we blundered into a sandworm in the midst of fending off a twin death scorpion. The thing swallowed me whole instantly and started to drag me underground. Startled as I was, I managed to instantly fire off the intermediate spell Wind Slice to rip it apart from the inside. After using earth magic to tunnel my way back above ground, I found that Elenialis had taken a hit from the scorpion's poisonous stingers. She was down on her knees and her face was purple. She'd been so alarmed to see the sandworm swallow me that she'd lost her focus. I quickly killed the scorpion and used my detoxification magic to save her life. Neither of us had really screwed up this time, honestly. We'd just gotten unlucky.
Nice work getting us out of that mess, Rudeus. I can see why you acquired such a reputation as an adventurer.
Elenialis certainly didn't blame me for the situation, even though she'd nearly died, and I was the one who'd been more careless. The woman was definitely mature.
Don't look so miserable, all right? No matter how alert you are, sometimes things just get the better of you. We managed to pull through, and that's what matters.
The risk of failure was ever present, as was that of death. Elenialis had been well aware of that from the start. Fortunately, that was our only brush with real danger on that day. We did catch a glimpse of a colossal monster in the distance at one point. It was trudging along slowly, but every step it took sent up a huge cloud of sand visible even from a great distance. The thing had to be hundreds of meters in size. It was hard to describe. I guess you could say it was like a blue whale with the legs of an elephant.
That's a behemoth, Rudeus.
Huh. You've seen one of those before, Lise.
Oh? Somebody's gotten a bit more casual all of a sudden.
I don't know about that. I just try to be respectful with my elders.
Sonoba's older than you too, you know.
Well, sure, but he's basically just a big kid. Apparently, the behemoth was one of this continent's more famous monsters. They ranged in length from 100 to 1,000 meters. It wasn't clear what the things ate, but they were only ever sighted in the desert. They had peaceful dispositions for monsters and tended to leave people alone unless attacked. A few adventurers claimed to have slain one and found massive numbers of magic stones inside its belly. Hearing these rumors, some people had tried to hunt them for profit, but bringing down a behemoth was much easier said than done. Their outer hide was extremely tough, and given their sheer size, your average adventurer was barely going to scratch them. They had no particular attacks or natural weapons, but simply thrashing their massive bodies around was enough to kill most of their enemies. What if you attacked them from a distance then? Well, apparently the creatures were capable of burrowing deep beneath the sand when things started to heat up. Almost no one had actually succeeded in killing one. Additionally, despite their massive size, nobody had ever found a behemoth corpse. This had given rise to rumors that there was a hidden behemoth burial ground somewhere. An exciting concept. It reminded me of similar myths about elephant graveyards back in my old world. But realistically speaking, their corpses were probably just eaten by other monsters.
You know, you might be able to take one down if you tried, Rudeus.
I'm not planning to go around assaulting harmless herbivores for no good reason. Still, if I ever found myself seriously hard up for money, it might be worth a shot to throw some magic at one from a safe distance. On our third day in the desert, we encountered our first sandstorm. Maybe encountered isn't the right word. We were just walking along when we saw something that looked like a wall in the distance, and when we got closer, it turned out to be a wall of sand. Elenialis and I considered the possibility of waiting for it to die down, but from the looks of things, this was a static storm that blew constantly in this one location. It didn't look likely to rush past us or disappear. And we were in a hurry, of course. I ended up using my magic to clear the storm until we pushed through the area. My professors had told me it was best not to meddle with the weather too much, but this felt like a case where I was justified. When I turned to look back after about an hour of walking, I found that the sandstorm had reappeared exactly where it had been before. It seemed plausible that it was a sort of magic barrier in its own right, a natural-looking defense of the road that led to Orsted's teleporter, maybe. Nanahoshi hadn't mentioned it, but I seemed to remember her saying that she'd been kind of out of it during their trip through the desert. On our fourth day, the number of monsters we encountered decreased sharply. Maybe that sandstorm kept them sealed off in the area we just left. There were creatures in this part of the desert too, of course, but they were totally different from the region around the ruin. The scorpions only had one tail, and there were no armies of ants. The sandworms were only about as thick as Elise's waist now. Also, there didn't seem to be any giant bats flapping around at night. We spotted a few raptors here and there in the twilight hours, but they were smaller, and so were their packs. There was no sign of any Garuda. Most importantly, there were no more nocturnal ambushes from the succubi. I guess that was for the best, but maybe a part of me was disappointed? Nah, let's say not. Day 5 was more of the same. We trudged through the same old sand, staring out at the same old featureless landscape. When you're walking through a place without any visible landmarks, it's supposedly easy to end up going in circles when you think you're moving straight forward. It has something to do with the difference in the length of your stride when you're moving your dominant leg. I was confident Elenice was keeping us on track, but I was still starting to feel like I'd seen some of these sand dunes before. Doubt crept into my mind. Could she actually be lost? My growing mistrust wasn't a problem in itself, as long as I kept it to myself. Elise would be very annoyed if I voiced any of these thoughts, and if it threw off our teamwork, we might end up dead. The only thing I could do here was be understanding. If she did screw up, I needed to say, "That's okay," with a big smile. This was a no negativity zone.
Rudeus, I think I see something in the distance.
In the end, my resolve wasn't actually tested. I could indeed make out a vague blur shimmering on the horizon in the direction Elise was pointing. There was definitely something out there. My eyes weren't sharp enough to tell what it was, but its color suggested it wasn't just part of the desert. There was still a possibility it was just a mirage, though. We made our way toward the blur, staying on high alert. Come to think of it, we hadn't run into any monsters today at all. Maybe this area just wasn't home to any... Not that I was going to let my guard down, of course. As I was thinking this, the shape ahead of us grew larger and clearer. It was a giant rock formation that made me think of Ayers Rock, and it was maybe 50 meters in height. The wall facing us looked very steep, if not totally vertical. Climbing to the top would probably be challenging, and it stretched from one side of the horizon to the other, with no end in sight.
Should we try to find a way around it?
No, let's get up on top of it. I'll use my magic. With a simple earth spell, I created a pillar of stone. Taking Elenice into my arms, I rode it upward like a makeshift elevator. There was no telling what might try to ambush us up there, so I took it fairly slowly. Suddenly, I noticed an odd sensation. Something was rubbing my butt? Elenice?
What is it?
Is there some reason you're groping me?
Oh, just force of habit. Think nothing of it.
For the several minutes it took us to rise to the top of the rock shelf, Elenice continued feeling me up. Maybe her curse was starting to affect her. I was keeping Cliff's invention supplied with mana, but all it did was buy us more time, and it had been about 10 days since the last time she'd been with Cliff. She could probably hold out a while longer, but the thing was just a prototype. We couldn't trust it blindly. The sooner we got to a city, the better. In the worst-case scenario, I'd have to sleep with her myself. But no matter how I tried to spin it, that would be cheating on my wife. It would still be a betrayal, even if I could blame it on the curse. We decided beforehand that I wasn't going to sleep with Elenice on this trip, and I needed to keep that promise. If Bazaar had a brothel where she could hire a male prostitute, that would be ideal. That way, it would just be a business transaction. She could see to her needs without either of us feeling too guilty about it. Elenice, we're at the top now.
Yes, I suppose we are.
Elenice was still clinging to me, and she seemed to be staring at my shoulders with some passion in her eyes. You can get off now.
Ah, right. Pardon me.
Elenice stepped off the pillar and away from me, but her eyes quickly drifted downward to my lower body. I was definitely starting to sense some danger here. Maybe holding her like that on the way up had been a mistake. If I'd just taken a few minutes to think, I could have figured out another way to get us both up here. In retrospect, I felt like she'd been consciously trying to avoid physical contact with me these last few days. And now I'd gone and thrown a wrench in the works. We needed to get to this bizarre place fast.
Let's get going then.
Sure. Only a few seconds after we began to walk, though, a shadow flitted across the ground toward us.
Rudeus, Get down!
As Elanialis shouted out a warning, I threw myself down and forward without even looking upward. An instant later, something zoomed past above me and a cold tingle ran down my spine. I quickly jumped back to my feet and looked up. We'd been attacked by a monster with the body of a lion and the head of an eagle. Beating its massive wings loudly, it thumped to the ground some distance away from us.
That's a griffin!
Annalise shouted, drawing her sword. I quickly focused my thoughts on the battle at hand. Readying my staff and turning to face the creature would leave me in an awkwardly exposed position, and Elanice was currently behind me, a reversal of our usual formation. But even in a situation like this, she could probably maneuver her way to the front line without getting in my line of fire, and then I could fall back to safety. Or so I thought at first.
There's two of them. Rudeus, you deal with that one.
A loud flapping sound from behind confirmed that we'd been caught in a pincer attack. I'd have to deal with Griffin A over here by himself. If I dodged out of its path, it would charge right past me and hit Elanice from behind. Still, maybe that was the safer route. If she could hold off both of them for a few moments, I'd be able to pick them off one at a time. That would be more like our usual pattern, at least, but we hadn't worked out any plan to that effect in advance. She told me to deal with this one. So if I didn't kill it, she'd be taken by surprise. Right then. The griffin was standing with its body bent forward, its beak half open, glaring fiercely at me. It wasn't far from me, and it looked like an agile creature. It might be able to dodge my stone cannon or even shrug it off. I wanted to be absolutely sure I killed this thing. It had wings. I wasn't sure how far it could fly on them, but Quagmire probably wouldn't be too effective either. That left my wind magic. The griffin's back legs tensed up suddenly. I was out of time to think. Launching itself forward with a powerful kick, the monster rushed at me with its legs outstretched like a pouncing tiger. I ducked down and cast the advanced spell, Earth Hedgehog, at the ground. A circle of 3-meter earthen spikes burst up all around me.
Kyuya.
The griffin instantly beat its wings, but my eye of foresight was kind enough to show me what it was planning. It adjusts its course in midair, dodges to the side, and tries to take its distance. Whipping my left hand forward, I fired off a wind spell, creating a shockwave in midair that robbed the griffin of its mobility. It spun helplessly for an instant, but before I could follow up, it twisted its body around with cat-like agility, trying to brace itself for a smooth landing. I fired off a stone cannon at the spot it was falling toward. The projectile whistled through the air and struck home, passing straight through the creature's body with a wet crunch. The griffin staggered backward a few steps, then collapsed loudly to the ground. The thing looked dead already, but I finished it off with a fire spell to be absolutely sure, and then spun around to see how Elanilis was faring. Fortunately, she was okay. I saw her fending off the griffin's swipes with her shield while striking at it with her rapier. The griffin's front legs were red with blood. She'd obviously been targeting them persistently, trying to reduce its ability to attack. Heads up, Elanilis. Stone cannon! After a shout of warning, I fired off another deadly projectile. Elanilis sidestepped nimbly out of its path. The griffin didn't follow her. It had noticed me and was trying to dodge into the air. But Elanilis stabbed out with her rapier, striking a shallow blow on its leading leg that dropped it back down. The sharpened stone hit the griffin at the neck and tore through its body, severing its spine on the way out. It crashed to the ground headfirst and began to convulse. Elanilis strode forward and stabbed the creature in the head to put it out of its misery. I proceeded to burn its body with fire magic. The two of us took a few moments to look around the area for any additional reinforcements before finally letting out a sigh of relief.
Sorry about that, Rudeus. I got a little careless.
Nah, I'm the one who wasn't looking above me. After apologizing to each other for our slip-ups, we turned our attention to the road ahead. The top of the rock shelf had a coating of sand here and there, but for the most part, it was solid stone. At least we wouldn't have to worry about anything lurking under the surface. Let's make sure we watch the skies from now on.
Yes, let's.
With that brief battle analysis complete, we set off once again. On day 6, we figured out that the rock shelf was a griffin nesting ground. Multiple creatures seemed to have divided up the area into their own territories, judging by the steady pace of the attacks we faced. Griffins were B-rank monsters. They didn't use any magic, but they were physically powerful and had limited flight capabilities.
That added mobility made them much more challenging for a magician like me to target. Most of the time we encountered them alone, but sometimes you'd get small family packs of 2 to 5. The creatures were clever and could organize coordinated attacks and ambushes, so in a group, they were considered an A-rank threat. They weren't any match for us without the element of surprise, though. Night fell, but no succubi appeared to harass us. They presumably avoided griffin turf. From the looks of things, the griffins were pretty territorial. Once you beat off the locals, there wasn't much risk of another group barging in to attack you that same day. In other words, we were safe here for the moment. For the first time in a while, we made ourselves a campfire and roasted some griffin meat for dinner. The last group we'd beaten was a male, a female, and their child, so we went with the youngest of the 3. Young animals tended to be more tender and tastier. I did feel a little bit conflicted, as someone who was going to be a father himself before too long, but we do what we have to in order to survive. People are selfish creatures, at the end of the day. Fortunately, I'd picked up a few tricks when it came to cooking monster meat, like carrying my own spices with me. The raptors hadn't been particularly tasty, but the griffin was basically part bird and part mammal, so I had higher hopes this time around. For the seasoning, I used 1 part ground kokuri nuts to 2 parts awazu seeds and abi leaves. After mixing and grinding them together, I tested the blend by licking my finger. Nice and spicy. I rubbed the seasoning evenly across the surface of the cut we'd butchered out of the beast, taking care to rub it in well. After adding a sprinkle of salt, I moved on the cooking part. Once the surface was done, I moved the meat a little further from the fire to lower the heat and waited a bit longer. Once the fat was visibly sizzling, we were good to go. Trying not to burn my tongue, I took a cautious experimental bite. The meat was both tender and juicy. It had a slightly odd flavor to it, but the spices almost completely masked that. Given the way I'd done things, it wasn't cooked completely all the way through. But that wasn't an issue, and once you chewed off the surface, you could just sprinkle a little more seasoning on.
Ah, this really takes me back. Geese always used to carry around little bottles of spice like that too.
Yeah, that seems pretty common with rogue types, doesn't it? After Eris dumped me, I'd spent several years living the adventurer life. Naturally, I'd spent some of that time working in parties. It felt like there was always one guy in every group who'd make his own spices and carry them around. For some reason, it was usually the dagger-wielding, lock-picking, trap-disarming sorts. I'd often noticed them squirreling random nuts and leaves away for later. Forged materials weren't just useful for cooking, though. Sometimes you'd run into a monster that recoiled from the strong tastes and smells of certain plants. Some plants also made a decent insect repellent in a pinch. I'd even seen one guy who even tossed some kind of powder in his enemy's eyes to blind them.
I like the way you seasoned this quite a lot, Rudeus.
Well, that's good to hear. Elenilis was openly licking the fat from her fingers. You wouldn't usually catch her doing that when she was eating in a random tavern. Not unless she was trying to seduce someone. Your table manners aren't the best today, Elenilis.
Goodness, now you sound like Zenith.
Did Mom used to nag you about that?
Oh, yes. She'd flush bright red and hiss, "You're a lady, Elenilis. Try to act like it."
Elenalis's imitation of Zenith didn't quite line up with the woman I remembered, but I guess they'd known each other well before I was born. I found myself wondering about where Zenith was now for a moment, but I shook the thought out of my head. There was no point in making myself anxious. Were you just as promiscuous back then, too?
Promiscuous? That's rather rude. I suppose I was, though. But back in those days, we all used to sleep in our underwear or the nude. Ghislaine didn't even know what a bra was at first. You should have seen the way Paul ogled her.
It was hard to imagine Ghislaine being quite that shameless, but maybe she was just clueless. That would fit with what I knew of her. As for Paul, well, not to excuse the guy's behavior, but I probably would have done the same thing. Beast folk women tended to be pretty impressive in the chest department.
You know, come to think of it, I guess Zenith was about your age now when I first met her.
Really? You've known her since she was a teenager?
Yes. She was a clueless, innocent little girl. Paul picked her up off the street and dragged her into our party. The scoundrel.
There was a fond, nostalgic look in Elenialis's eyes as she reminisced. Come to think of it, Geese and Ghislaine had seemed just as happy when they talked vaguely about the past. They'd probably had some good times together. I got the impression Dad wants to apologize to you about something that happened back then. Is it all right if I ask what it was?
You're better off not knowing, dear. I don't think you want to hear too much about your father's romantic history, do you?
Yeah, you're right. To tell the truth, I kind of did want to know, but I didn't want to pressure her. Sometimes a man has to swallow his curiosity. At least her reply told me it had something to do with his love life now. He'd apparently been in a physical relationship with Ghislaine at some point, so it wouldn't surprise me if he'd been sleeping with Elenilis too. And then Zenith got pregnant, and the whole party fell apart. I could easily imagine how that could lead to some ugly drama. Once we make it to Rapan, I'm sure he'll fall over himself to apologize.
I'm not going to forgive him no matter what he says.
Elenilis was scowling again. Whatever happened must have been seriously ugly. Paul really was a good-for-nothing bum. But that exactly was why I had to help him out. Guys like him and me had to look out for each other. If worse came to worst, I'd just have to beg Elenilis to forgive him myself. The 7th day started off like the 6th, and we made steady progress north while fighting off Gryphons. This rock shelf went back further than I'd expected. Maybe it was more of a mountain. While the top was mostly flat, we couldn't see far in any direction thanks to the giant boulders strewn randomly across its surface. Every once in a while, though, we'd come across a more open area. This was where the local Gryphons would attack us. Rinse and repeat. Oh! But then, quite suddenly, the rock shelf came to an end. Well, it's about time. The ground far below us wasn't barren desert anymore. There was a smattering of trees and plants down there. It looked kind of like a savanna, without much in the way of grass. In the distance was a large lake with white roofs clustered all around it. We'd found the city of Bazaar. Chapter 13, Bazaar. Our 8th day on the Begarit continent, we lowered ourselves down off the rock shelf and headed for Bazaar. From our vantage point, the city looked a bit like a donut. The big round lake in the middle was surrounded by a ring of white frosting dash tents and buildings, with a small green area on the outskirts. Come to think of it, I hadn't eaten anything sweet in a while now.
We're finally here. That was quite a hike, I must say.
Yeah, no kidding. It feels like we covered a lot of ground in the last week.
I suppose the monsters made it feel even longer than it was.
The ground in this area wasn't just sand. There was actual soil here, although its reddish-brown color suggested it wasn't particularly rich, and the plains were dotted with sizable boulders and a few scraggly plants. It reminded me a bit of the Demon Continent, actually. At least it was easier to walk on, and the temperature was much less extreme here. There was a stark difference in climate compared to the desert on the other side of that rock shelf. By the time we reached the outskirts of Bazaar, it was already evening, and bats were starting to flutter through the sky. They didn't swoop down to attack us, though, and there weren't any succubi accompanying them. They were just ordinary bats. Still, there might be other monsters lurking around, even if we were close to the city now. We stayed alert as we approached it. Just as we were getting close, there was a piercing cry from somewhere nearby. Recognizing the call of a griffin, the two of us instantly tensed up. Is it coming for us?
No, I don't think so. They're fighting over there, see?
Elenilis was peering at something up ahead of us, but I couldn't make out what she was looking at. Who is it?
I couldn't say.
We moved forward cautiously in the direction of the city. Soon enough, I spotted a small group of people fighting a pack of griffins up ahead. There were 4 humans and 5 of the monsters. Well, there had been 6 humans, but 2 of them were lying motionless on the ground. Of the 4 survivors, 1 was crouching down and clutching his head rather than fighting. In other words, it was 3 against 5. The outnumbered humans were fending off the griffins with sizable broadswords. They were a well-coordinated group, but it was obvious that they were starting to get tired. Should we help them out, Eloise?
I'll leave it up to you.
Let's do it then. Abandoning them would probably leave a bad taste in my mouth. I didn't see any reason not to ride to the rescue. All right, Cover me!
Got it.
Ellen Allies was already rushing forward. As she approached, I fired off a shockwave blast at a griffin that was currently in the air. My spell was a direct hit. The monster had been focused on the enemies in front of it. The blast wasn't enough to kill it instantly, but it did send it tumbling to the ground, spraying feathers in all directions. Ellen Allies leapt on the fallen beast and stabbed it in the neck with her sword. I fired off more wind spells in quick succession. My second target went down from a single blast, but the third managed to evade my spell. The creatures were aware of my attacks at this point, but they also had armed warriors in front of them, and Ellen Allies was blocking their path to me. I was free to fire off as many spells as I wanted without fear of retaliation. It was like shooting fish in a barrel. Once I'd picked off 4 of the monsters, the last of them tried to flee. I finished it off with a stone cannon to the back. It was never smart to let a wounded, desperate beast go free. With the battle over, Ellen Allies and I sheathed our weapons and approached the group of warriors.
Aye, is it over?
The man who'd been crouching down and quivering finally raised his face. After looking around the area nervously, he smiled in obvious relief. The warriors who'd been fighting the griffins turned and approached him. Rising to his feet, the man immediately began shouting at them.
What are you standing around for? You! Get out there and start looking.
The warrior he'd addressed nodded and immediately ran off.
Good grief, what a disaster! What on earth was a pack of griffins doing all the way out here anyway?
Shaking his head, he turned and approached us, with the other 2 warriors at his side.
Your assistance was most kind, travelers. Allow me to express my gratitude.
The man wore a turban and a red robe underneath a thin yellow gown of sorts. There was a small red dot in the middle of his forehead. He had a long, skinny mustache, but it didn't make him look especially imposing. He struck me as more of a timid sort, the very picture of a stereotypical desert merchant, too. That was fine by me. Well, it looked like you were in some trouble. We couldn't just abandon you.
Most people certainly would have.
The man was speaking in the fighting god tongue, so I'd replied in kind. Fortunately, he appeared to understand me just fine. That was a hopeful sign.
May the blessings of the wind grace you and yours.
With those final words, the man promptly turned and walked back to his fallen companions. Not the most expressive sort, then. The 2 other members of his party were fighters who wore red armor and a thick skirt-like garment around their waists. They were more heavily equipped than the average Central Continent warrior. The weapons at their hips were large, curved swords with thick blades more than a meter in length. I'd often seen similar scimitars on the Demon Continent, actually. They were probably effective against larger monsters. Still, such heavy arms and armor wasn't ideal for fighting agile monsters like griffins. Maybe that was part of the reason they'd been struggling.
Don't see mages too often in these parts.
The one who spoke up first was a huge man with a patch over his left eye and a tattoo covering his face. He was nearly 6 feet tall and probably around 40 years old, obviously a seasoned veteran.
Hey, boss! Is that girl a succubus?
The other warrior was a girl with light brown skin who was staring at Ellen Allies. I couldn't see much of her underneath the armor, but she looked muscular. I would have guessed she was in her mid-20s.
What is she saying, Rudeus?
She's wondering if you're a succubus.
Well, I suppose I am. In a manner of speaking.
Wow! She admits it!
That said, I don't make a habit of spraying foul odors all over the place.
I keep telling you, they smell really good to me. The huge man turned to his companion and chopped her on the head.
Don't be an idiot. What kind of succubus travels with a man? You've got some nerve insulting them after they saved our lives.
Oh! But boss, you said a girl who shows up when there's bats around's got to be a succubus.
It took some effort to understand what she was saying. Maybe her accent was just really strong? I could make out the words, but it wasn't easy.
This is exactly why they call you Bonehead, kid.
The man, on the other hand, spoke more clearly. I didn't know if he was more fluent in fighting God tongue or what, but I understood him much easier. Sighing, he turned to Eleniles to apologize.
Sorry, miss. We didn't mean no offense. Carmelita here is kind of a moron, that's all.
Eleniles looked awkwardly in my direction. She had no idea what the man was saying to her.
What's this now? Is he trying to make a move on me or something?
No, he's apologizing because the woman called you a succubus.
Ah, is that all? Well, tell them I wasn't offended at all.
Elenilis turned her most brilliant smile on the big man, prompting him to blush fiercely. She says she doesn't mind.
And no kidding? Does she not speak our language or something?
Nope, I can interpret for her, though. The big man was openly staring at Elenilis now. It wasn't hard to guess what he might be thinking. That's a fine woman there, or something along those lines. Maybe too bad she's kinda flat-chested. Elenilis didn't seem to mind the ogling. If anything, she looked kind of proud to be ogled. I guess she was used to it by now. Pulling his gaze away from Elenilas, the man looked over at me again.
My name's Balibadum. Thanks again for your help, stranger.
I'm Rudeus Greyrat, and this is Elenilis.
Got it. Well, if you ever need anything...
Hey, what's the holdup, you two? We need to find that cargo now.
Whoops, sorry. Gotta go. I'm sure our employer will reward you later too.
Balabadam and Carmelita ran over to their boss. The three of them had a brief conference, then split into two groups and ran off in different directions. They were gone in an instant.
What, they're just leaving? I expected a bit more gratitude.
I could understand how she felt, but we hadn't gone into this expecting a reward. Looks like they left their wounded behind, too. They're dead. I looked down at the fallen fighters, ready to cast a healing spell or two. Come to think of it, the survivors hadn't even attempted to aid them after the battle. They'd probably been well aware that they were gone.
This one was still awfully young. The poor thing.
One of the dead was a teenage girl, maybe 18 years old. There was a gaping hole in her forehead where a griffin's sharp beak had struck her. She must have died instantly. I wonder if leaving the dead where they fell is a tradition on this continent.
No decent adventurer would ever do such a thing.
Well, those people didn't look like adventurers to me. Since their party had vanished, I burned the bodies with my magic and buried them myself. It did seem a little heartless, the way they'd left them here. That Balabottom guy had promised we'd be rewarded later, but we didn't even know the name of that guy with the mustache. And how were they supposed to come find us if they didn't know who we were? Did they expect us to track them down and demand payment or something? Well, whatever. It wasn't like I'd intervened in the hopes of a big payoff or anything. I'd have to satisfy myself with having done my good deed for the day. Let's get going, I guess.
All right, then.
The two of us walked off toward Bazaar. By the time we reached the city proper, the sun had set. The place was surprisingly well lit, though. There were large bonfires all around, like the kind you'd see at a festival fair. The ground around these bonfires was covered in carpets of some kind. People sat on these in groups, happily eating and carousing with each other. It kind of reminded me of a big cherry blossom viewing picnic, actually. Everyone seemed to have turbans on their heads. The colors and patterns of their clothes differed widely, but many of them reminded me of the tribal clothing I'd seen on the Demon Continent. Elenice and I were going to stick out like sore thumbs. Not that it really mattered. I'm getting a bit hungry, aren't you?
Yes, I suppose so.
Watching everyone feasting all around us got our stomachs growling quickly enough. Still, we had to find ourselves a place to stay first. As I was looking around for an inn, though, a man came up and called to us.
Hey, you two. Looking for a meal? I can squeeze you in for just 3 sincha right now.
From the sound of things, his group was selling off the excess portions of a huge meal they'd made. We decided to take him up on the offer. You couldn't think on an empty stomach after all. Once we'd settled ourselves down on the carpet, the man who'd led us there held out his hand expectantly.
Gonna have to ask you to pay up front, folks. We already cooked the food, see?
I took out 3 bronze coins and handed them over. He examined them suspiciously.
What the hell are these things?
Bronze coins from the kingdom of Asura.
The kingdom of what now? I can't use these things, buddy.
As I'd feared, it looked like money from the central continent was no good here. It made sense, really. I'd been planning to exchange my currency somewhere, but we hadn't had the chance yet.
How about this then?
As I was trying to figure out my next move, Elenilis dropped something else into the man's palm. It was a small golden ring. He held it up and examined it closely, then nodded happily and went off to find another customer.
It's best just to barter in situations like that.
That was those veteran instincts at work again. She'd figured out the right move almost instantly. I'm glad I've got you around, Elenilis. You really know your stuff.
There's no need for flattery, dear.
We settled down on the carpet to wait for our food. This brought back some very old memories from my previous life in Japan. I hadn't been doing much sitting on the ground lately.
Here yo, folks.
We hadn't placed an order or anything, but our food came anyway. The main dish was a thick white bean soup with some mysterious chunks in it, but we had spicy steamed meat on the side. There was also a strange tropical fruit with a slightly sour taste which they'd covered in a sweet sauce of some kind. The sweet soup, spicy meat, and sour fruit made for an interesting combination. The meal seemed a little lacking in the carbs department, but once I got started, I found myself enjoying it a lot. The soup was particularly good. The mystery white chunks floating around in it turned out to be rice, rather than meat. So it was a kind of rice gruel? I hadn't been expecting to find rice here, of all places. There couldn't possibly be any rice paddies in this climate, so they had to be growing it in dry soil. I'd heard that was possible, although more challenging to pull off. It was definitely a pleasant surprise, and I ended up gobbling down the soup in no time at all. My love for rice had only grown stronger over the years. Just getting a cup of it in my belly made me feel invincible, like I was ready to take on the world. I'd have to see if it was possible to cultivate rice in the Northern Territories somehow. If I taught Aisha the basics of planting crops, maybe she could get a little field going in our yard. Then again, it probably wouldn't be right to turn my little sister into an agricultural worker for my own pleasure.
Oh, you're not whining about the food for once, Rudeus. That's unusual.
Well, it was better than I was expecting, honestly. I even ended up asking for seconds. I never complained about Sylphie's cooking or anything, just to be clear, but rice definitely held a special place in my heart. If I only had some eggs and soy sauce to go with it, everything would be perfect. I could always raid a Garuda nest for the eggs, right? They were basically just giant chickens after all. That just left the soy sauce. Maybe this continent would surprise me again, and I'd find some for sale in the market. Let's see if we can't find ourselves an inn then. But of course, we weren't here on vacation. If we had a little extra time after saving Paul, maybe I could pursue this little side project. Now wasn't the time.
Right. I think it's best we leave finding a guide until tomorrow.
Most of the merchants around us were already closing up shop and heading home. The bonfires were going out one by one, and people seemed to be getting ready for bed. It seemed a little early to me, but we clearly weren't going to be able to hire anyone tonight. Spotting the man who'd sold us our meal earlier, I called out to him. "Excuse me, are there any inns around here?"
What are you talking about? Just sleep wherever you want.
Interesting. Apparently, visitors to Bazaar who hadn't brought their own tent just slept out under the stars. We could always make ourselves a shelter with my magic, though.
Where should we settle down then?
It looks like people are clustering closer to the water.
Okay then, let's set ourselves back a little bit from the crowd.
The two of us picked our way around for a while, then found a nice open spot midway between 2 larger tents. There were guards hanging around outside them, so we probably wouldn't have to worry about any thieves. I made our shelter on the larger side this time. It took longer to create than usual, but we'd have more space to spend the night in. Once the sun rose, it would probably get brutally hot in here really quick, so we wouldn't be using it longer than that. Phew! Well, at least we made it this far, right?
So far, so good.
Dropping our bags on the ground, we allowed ourselves to breathe a sigh of relief. Still, we're only halfway there. Let's make sure we stay on our toes.
First things first. Tomorrow, we'll buy the provisions we need and find ourselves a guide.
We spent a few minutes quickly going over our priorities. First and foremost, we needed to exchange our money, buy provisions, confirm the route to Rapon, and hire a guide. We also took a little time to maintain our equipment. Eleniles cleaned her sword and shield, and I looked over our protective gear for any damage. This was just a part of our daily routine by now. After a few minutes, we finished up and spread out the furs we used for our bedding. But just as I was about to turn in for the night, Elenice got to her feet.
Okay then. I'll be going out for a little while.
What? Is she running to the convenience store or something? To do what? Elenice smiled at the question.
To pick up a man.
In other words, she was going to reset the timer on her curse. You still got a little more time, don't you? Elenice's curse kicked into full gear every 2 to 4 weeks. Cliff's magical implement more than doubled that deadline, so she was good for at least a month in between encounters. It had only been 2 weeks since we left, and it was probably beginning to have some effect on her, but it wasn't urgent yet.
That's true, but I'm gonna hire someone anyway while we're here.
Right? This trip was going to last 3 months at the very least. Given how uncertain we were about what lay ahead of us, 4 months was probably a more likely estimate. Even in the best-case scenario, Elenice would need to sleep with someone at least once in that time. There was no getting around it. Okay then, I guess I'll see you later.
Yes, I'll be back eventually. Don't wait up for me, though. Get your sleep in.
Well, okay, but you don't speak the language here, do you?
That won't be an issue. This sort of thing works the same way anywhere you go.
With that, Elenice left the shelter and walked off into the city. The next morning, I jerked awake to screams of ant attack, as an army of phalanx ants descended on the city. And then I woke up for real. For once, I'd actually gotten a full night's sleep, and my dreams had mostly been pleasant. I remembered one that involved Aisha and Norn demanding that I carry them on my shoulders. When I hefted Norn up there, Aisha would sulk, and when I switched to Aisha, Norn started bawling. But eventually, Sylphie showed up and seized their prize, my shoulders, for herself. I gently chided her, explaining that everyone should take turns, but she replied, "Too bad, this is my seat now. Nobody else gets to use it." My poor sisters started wailing miserably, of course. Sylphie had been a grown woman when she first showed up in the dream, but she turned into a 7-year-old version of herself once I put her on my shoulders. It was a nice dream. When I woke up and remembered it, I found myself smirking. Today felt like it was going to be a good day. Looking over, I saw Elenice fast asleep, a satisfied expression on her face. It looked like she'd had fun last night. That was good to know, although I felt a little bad for Cliff. In the morning hours, Bazaar had completely transformed itself. The quiet of the night gave way to a burst of lively commerce. Merchants spread out their goods outside their tents and called out loudly to everyone who passed by.
I got big, juicy melons here. Last chance, folks. They're all gone tomorrow. Griffin Claws here. 30 sencha if you buy now. Anyone got Nanya cloth? I've got Tokotsu fruit to trade.
The sellers shouted out their prices while their prospective customers yelled back offers just as loudly. Some were exchanging currency, but many were bartering too. The market crowd seemed to stretch out all around us as far as the eye could see. Here and there I saw scuffles or fistfights breaking out, but they seemed to be quarrels between merchants rather than anything really dangerous.
I've got glass bottles from Vega. I won't be taking these any further east. Anybody need to stock up?
Glass products, in particular, seemed to be a focus of trade. I had to assume it was a major industry in this region. One merchant had shelves and shelves full of rectangular containers with intricate symbols carved into their surface. They looked a bit like fancy whiskey bottles. Some were brightly colored, but they were all remarkably smooth and clear. The central continent had glass as well. but it tended to be thin and only semi-transparent. I'd heard that the richer parts of Asura had artisans who made good glass, but this region probably produced the real quality stuff. Mushoku Tensei Volume 11 by Refugin Magano, cast by RTL Studio. If you are interested in creating your own audio drama like this, please visit rtl.ai and use promotion code RTL to activate your account. Now, enjoy the story. Of course, even this glass wasn't comparable to what I'd gotten used to back in Japan, but some of their pieces were obviously handcrafted with care. I found myself tempted to buy something as a souvenir.
Rudeus, we didn't come here to shop for gifts.
Yeah, I know. As the market bustled all around us, Ellen Elias and I got to work on our to-do list from the night before. First of all, we needed money. The currency around here seemed to be the Sincha, something unfamiliar to me, which was kind of exciting in a way. In the central continent, everyone tended to use simple names like gold coins. The currency itself wasn't particularly different from any other, though. It was just a small round piece of gold with a design poorly stamped onto its surface. I'd seen some of these before actually when I was passing through Eastport with Eris. We sold off some of the things we brought along with us and got our hands on a fair amount of this local currency. It seemed like barter was very common here, but it was always smart to have some cash in your pocket. The things we'd brought from the central continent fetched very good prices. To my surprise, a few cheap cuts of jerky sold for 3 times what we'd paid for them. We might have been able to negotiate them even higher if we'd tried. I felt like there was an opportunity to rake in some real cash by selling off meat here and buying up glass to sell back in Ranoa, but trying to make money off that teleporter was just asking for trouble. For now, we secured ourselves about 5,000 Sincha to pay for our short-term needs. I wasn't sure how much we'd end up needing, but our dinner yesterday had only been 3 Sincha. We'd probably be fine for some time. With our money issues sorted, we started gathering information about Rapan. It was apparently a major city, so this wasn't difficult. As Nanahoshi had assured us, it was apparently about a 1-month journey to the north. I asked about the road there as well, just to get a sense for what we were up against.
So, the usual route is to head through the Enkots region and take the long way around the desert. But there's been a lot of bandits out that road recently, so it ain't safe. The smarter merchants are cutting right through the Ucho Desert these days. You head east till you hit the marker, then go north to the oasis. From there, it's a winding road over to the west for a while. Once you see the Kara Mountains, you keep them on your left and head north to the next oasis. From there, the desert's a little less brutal off to the east. You push your way through that as fast as you can, then head northwest to rejoin the normal road.
It was nice to get such a detailed reply, but none of this meant anything to me. There were lots of references to specific places I didn't know about, most of which sounded like generic mountains or patches of desert. I got the basic message that there were 2 routes to choose from, but if we tried to follow either, we'd probably get ourselves lost. Are there maps of this area for sale or anything? Maps weren't always reliable, but they helped. You could usually at least get a general sense of where you were. That was always reassuring.
Maps? Who the hell would bother making something like that?
It didn't sound like we'd have much luck on this front. This continent hadn't found its Ino Tarataka yet. We clearly needed to find ourselves a trustworthy guide after all. Okay then, do you know where we can find someone who'd be able to guide us to Rapan? I'd assumed this wouldn't be a problem, but...
I'm sure there are people who know the way, but you're not gonna find any guides looking for customers here. This city's more of a way station on the road.
Wait, really?
Yeah. I mean, usually you want to travel between the bigger trade hubs, right?
Ah, I see. That did make sense now that I thought about it. Why hadn't I realized this might be an issue before? Ellen Elias had assumed we'd find a guide quite easily, but her experience didn't really apply here. When she visited an unfamiliar land for the first time, she always started off at border cities where travelers were common. But this time, we'd used a teleporter to jump right into the middle of the continent instead. That difference had thrown us off. Things already weren't going as planned. Still, there was no point in panicking. Life always throws some curveballs at you. We'd only been out here for 2 weeks, and the journey would normally have taken an entire year. That was some impressive progress, no matter how you looked at it. What would you normally do in a situation like this, Eleni?
Push straight through on the shortest possible route. To be honest, though, I've had enough of walking through the desert for a while.
Yeah, same here.
What do you think, then?
Maybe we can tag along with the merchant making their way to Rapan?
That sounds like a plan. Let's see if we can find one.
Aisha had managed to reach Renoa quickly by hitching rides with merchant caravans. There was no reason we couldn't use the same trick. We didn't need to rush even. The only thing that mattered was getting to our destination safely. Sir, would you happen to know of any merchants who are on their way to Rapan? There wouldn't be any caravans actively looking for guards here, for the same reason that there weren't any guides to be found. But Elenilis was an S-rank adventurer, and I was a Water Saint tier magician. If we offered money and our services, we might find someone willing to bring us with them. Unfortunately, the man told us there weren't many people heading to Rapan in general. Most of the traveling merchants were on their way to a place called Kinkara in the east. There was some traffic to the north, though. Rapan was famous for its labyrinths, which produced a steady stream of valuable magic items. If you stocked up on those, you could sell them at higher prices in other cities. Some merchants made their living that way. Most of them brought magic stones and crystals from the southwest up to Rapan, where they sold their cargo and funneled the profits into buying magic items.
Dunno if there's anyone like that around right now, though. We'll definitely get a bunch in a few months, at least.
This wasn't too reassuring. I was starting to think we might be better off just hitching a ride to that city out east. We'd be going out of our way, but at least we'd reach a trading hub where we might find a guide. Still, I tried asking around the city for a while. Almost everyone was headed to Kinkara, and after an hour or two I'd very nearly resigned myself to that route. But then, just as I was getting ready to give up, we stumbled on a lead.
Oh, Rapan? You'll be wanting Galban then. I think he pitched his tent over on the west side of the river. Go see if you can find him.
Elenilis and I immediately went looking for the Galban. He'd evidently made his fortune by traveling the route between Rapan and a city called Tenorio, bringing magic stones to Rapan and taking magic items back. People said he traveled in a caravan of 6 camels, which meant he was earning good money. It didn't take much asking around before we found the tent that we were looking for. It wasn't that huge, but there were in fact 6 camels tethered out front. As we approached, a brown-skinned woman emerged from inside the tent. She wore a breastplate and a skirt-like wrap around her waist. You couldn't see her muscles under the gear, but she looked pretty strong. It took me a few seconds to realize that this was actually Carmelita, the same warrior we'd met yesterday.
Hey! You're those people from yesterday.
Apparently, she remembered us as well, although she looked surprised to see us. It seemed the mustached little man we'd saved yesterday was Galban himself. Good thing we decided to help. Galban welcomed us with a warm smile as we stepped inside his tent.
My apologies for yesterday, friends. We were surprised to see you'd already left by the time we got back.
Apparently, they had run off to track down their camels, which had fled in the chaos along with the valuable cargo they were carrying. They'd returned to the spot of the battle afterward, only to find that we'd buried their comrades' bodies and disappeared. Galban claimed to have spent a good deal of time trying to find us that evening. You could have just explained the plan before you disappeared, then. Still, maybe that was just common sense in a place like this. Your cargo comes first, and everything else can wait.
It must be fate that you found us like this. Would you care to join my caravan as bodyguards?
He'd been looking to hire new sword arms anyway, from the sound of things. That made sense, since he'd lost a few yesterday.
How about 500 cincha to Rapan? What do you say?
Judging from the way he rattled off compliments on our elegant defeat of the Griffins, he'd had this idea in mind from the start. I seem to remember him being curled up in a ball for the entire battle. But whatever, this was exactly what we needed. All right, sure, we'll come with you as far as Rapan, then.
splendid. That's truly wonderful. I'd even be willing to sign you both to a long-term exclusive contract if you're interested. I've never seen a magician of your caliber before. I'd make it worth your while, I assure you. How about 10,000 cincha a year? No, wait. Balabottom would kick up a fuss. Would 8K enough? I could...
I'm sorry, but we've got something we need to take care of in Rappa. We'll keep the offer in mind, though. Galban accepted this easily enough. We'd found our ticket to Rappan. Everything was back on track. Chapter 14, The Warriors of the Desert. And so we set out for Rappan as members of Galban's caravan. The head of his guard team was the warrior Balabadam, also known as Hawkeye. His companions were Carmelita, the Bona Crusher, and Great Blade Taunt. Adding myself and Elenalize, we had 5 fighters and 1 merchant in our party. There were also 6 camels if you counted those. I considered making up names for those guys too, but decided against it after learning that we might have to eat them if we ran out of food in the desert. I didn't want my first taste of camel meat to be flavored with guilt. Before heading out, we'd held a meeting to work out our basic battle formation. As a general rule, we'd be keeping Galban in the middle. Balabottom was in front, accompanied by Carmelita on the left and Taunt to the right. Elenai and I would be positioned in the back. The 5 of us would form a protective circle around our employer and his camels. No matter what direction we were attacked from, one of us should be able to intercept the threat before it could harm our client. Your classic Imperial cross formation, basically. I felt like Carmelita or Taunt might be safer choices for the rear guard, but they wanted to keep me toward the back since I was a magician, and it made sense to keep Elenailes closer to me, since we were used to working together.
All right then, let's get moving.
We were starting off by traveling east from Bazaar until we reached the major regional road. The names of the places meant nothing to me, but this sounded like the route that was frequented by bandits. Just to be on the safe side, I let Ballybottom know about what I'd heard.
We don't know a safer route through the desert if the bandits do attack. That's what we're here for. Sometimes they just demand a toll and let us go on our way.
A toll, huh? I hadn't heard about this, but if we could buy our way out of trouble instead of fighting, so much the better. Bandits were just trying to make a living themselves. As long as we handed over what they wanted, they shouldn't ask for more. To be honest, the idea of handing over cash to a bunch of people who are threatening travelers instead of working honest jobs wasn't too appealing to me, but I wasn't the one who'd have to pay up in this case, so I could live with it. Still, there was a chance we'd run into some greedier bandits with an interest in more than money and goods. For example, they might demand we hand over Elenailes, given how attractive she was. That could be trouble. It's not like the 2 of us were old friends with Galban and company. We'd saved their lives, but that didn't mean they'd risk their necks for us if it came to it. There was always a chance they'd hang us out to dry.
You look nervous, Rudeus, but I wouldn't worry yourself too much. With a magician of your skills on our side, a few bandits shouldn't be an issue.
You think so?
I do, and if worst comes to worst, I'll use a little charm on them.
What? You want to get carried off to their base, chained up, and brutally...
Goodness, how extreme. As long as you go along willingly, even bandits will be gentle with you.
Are you speaking from experience here?
We all make mistakes in our youth.
Elenise didn't seem too concerned at all. Still, those days were long in the past, and she'd probably be less eager to do something like that now that she had Cliff in her life. Well, whatever. We could probably fend off an attack easily enough, as long as we weren't outnumbered too terribly. Our party trudged through barren fields for a while, heading east. We had to fight off a lot of monsters on the way. There were Begarit buffalos, which charged at you in groups, and great tarantulas, huge spiders that scuttled around furtively. We also encountered Windmaster eagles, flying monsters that would cast wind spells at you from above. Some of our friends from the desert made an appearance as well, mostly Cactus Trents and those killer lizards which were apparently called Jororaptors. However, Balibadam proved capable at spotting our enemies well ahead of time, so we never found ourselves forced into serious combat. It turned out he had a demon eye himself, which was why he'd earned the name Hawkeye. The man was muscular and tall, and probably in his mid-40s, judging from the wrinkles in the corner of his eyes. You could tell at a glance that he was the wily survivor type. His hair was cropped short on the sides and in the back. It reminded me a little of the team captain from that old basketball anime. I kept expecting him to shout, "Just tape it," or something. His demon eye was the same type as Galen's. It allowed him to see the flow of mana in the world around him. This was most useful as a means of detecting enemies.
We've got monsters ahead. Ready for combat, everyone?
So far, he perfectly predicted every approaching monster and change in the weather. It was almost like traveling with Rudeus. He wasn't quite as precise on the details, but he spotted enemies very quickly. His many years of experience was probably a factor there.
This brings me back a little. Ghislaine used to spot the monsters just like that, using her eye and her nose.
When you had someone in your party who could detect enemies in advance, combat tended to be a lot less risky. By the time the monsters came into range, I was ready to hit them with a spell. I'd started off using stone cannon, but aiming it precisely started to get tedious, so I was currently blasting them into the air with wind magic and then smashing them down into the ground. That took a bit less effort.
You're using those spells awfully freely, boy. Aren't you going to run out of mana?
I'd been getting so lazy about it that Balabadam eventually came back to speak with me, looking a bit concerned. I should be fine. I can keep this up all day long, I think.
I see. You're a great sorcerer, then?
What does that mean exactly?
It's a title given to magicians who have achieved deep mastery of their craft.
Well, I wouldn't say I'm a master of anything yet.
In any case, it's rare to find a magician willing to use their powers so freely.
Many magicians made a point of not spending more than half of their mana supply in any given day. That was standard in the Northern Territories, too. Since most mages weren't too physically strong, their mana supply was all they had to rely on to defend themselves. But I'd never even emptied half of my tank as far as I knew. Keeping some mana available for emergencies was basically just common sense. To desert warriors who didn't know much about magic, though, it probably looked like most mages were just slackers. Balabadam seemed to have enough experience fighting in the party to understand the real reason why magicians held back. Still, he didn't seem that knowledgeable about magic in general, given that he didn't comment on my silent spellcasting.
I'm glad to have your firepower on our side, but try to save some mana for unexpected situations. There's 5 of us in this group, you know. Hold back on the long-range attacks until I call for them.
Got it. I wasn't exactly trying to hide the fact that my mana supply was massive, but I didn't see a reason to come out and tell him that either. I wasn't too sure where my limits actually were, for one thing. I didn't want to get too cocky and end up causing a disaster. At night, the 5 of us took turns standing watch while Galban rested inside his tent alone. We were all expected to sleep outside. Not that I'd been expecting equal treatment or anything. I created a shelter and encouraged everyone to sleep inside it, but Balabadam and the others declined, saying they'd have a harder time noticing any monsters that might approach. That seemed like a legitimate reason to sleep outside, actually. It made me feel a little awkward to use the shelter myself, but Elenialis intervened.
There's no need to feel bad, Rudeus. We've got our own way of doing things, and we'll be more useful if we're well rested tomorrow.
That made sense to me, so we ended up sleeping in our little hut after all. It was definitely more restful than the alternative. 2 of us would be standing guard at a time throughout the night. I'd assumed 1 would be enough, but apparently it was safer this way when you had a group of this size. We'd be changing up the shifts every night. On our first night, I was paired with Carmelita. Hey there! Guess we're working together tonight, huh?
Yes, don't fall asleep. And number 4.
Well, I wasn't planning on it. While we did technically have a job to do out here, staring silently at nothing in particular can get pretty boring. The 2 of us eventually started to make a little conversation.
Thanks for the help.
Oh, you're welcome. It was no big deal.
You're strong. So's the other one. The woman.
Carmelita the Bone Crusher was a warrior by profession and would be turning 21 this year. Her weapon of choice was a sword with a wide, thick blade more than 1 meter in length, which she swung around ferociously in combat. It seemed like many of the warriors in this region favored huge weapons of that sort. Balabadam also carried a massive blade. There seemed to be many large monsters with thick, tough shells around here. It made sense to use weapons that wouldn't break easily. No matter how skilled a swordsman you might be, you wouldn't want to try punching a hole through an iron plate with a skinny little rapier. Their combat style seemed to be somewhat unique as well, from what I'd seen of it.
Your woman's sword is too thin, though. You can't kill anything with that.
You might be surprised, actually. It's a magic item, and she knows how to use it. I've seen her cut up griffins. Oh, and just so you know, she's not actually my woman. We're just friends heading to Rapan together.
But you sleep with her? Yes, when a succubus comes.
No. I know some detoxification magic, so I just use that.
When a succubus comes, the men are aroused. The women sleep with them. It's the way of things in the desert.
Oh? Carmelita went on to explain the connection between the succubi and the way warrior bands worked in the desert, sounding rather proud of herself. These days, succubi could be found all across this continent. The species was originally native to the southwest region, and their numbers were relatively low, but in the war 400 years ago, Laplace had deliberately encouraged them to reproduce. It had been part of his plan to break the stubborn resistance of the Greyrat warriors. Succubi were deadly against men. Their pheromones could incapacitate even strong-willed veteran fighters. I could attest to that part personally. If two of them were to come at me at once, or if one popped up right in front of me, I wasn't at all confident that I'd survive. Once hit by a succubus's pheromones, men were reduced to thoughtless slaves. But a single succubus can only bring so many victims back to her lair at once. They tend to pick out a few choice morsels, leaving any others behind. The men left behind in this manner then fight each other to the death. It sounded a lot like the charm status effect, honestly. To cure someone of this condition, you had to either dispel it with an intermediate tier detoxification spell or let them sleep with a woman. And 400 years ago, basically no one on this continent could use detoxification magic. As a result, many young men who were virgins ended up losing their lives. There wasn't much to be done. They didn't have anyone to sleep with. They probably died wishing they'd had sex with someone, even the succubus that doomed them. I could empathize. To jump forward a little, over time, the warriors of the Greyrat continent had adapted to their circumstances. Every band began to travel with a number of women. At first, these were often slaves or demon prisoners, but the warriors quickly realized that the non-combatants were slowing them down. The women had little stamina and constantly needed to be protected in battle. The warriors thought the matter over. They racked their brains for years and finally landed on a solution. They could train women to be fighters too. And that was how the women warriors of the Greyrat continent first came into being. At present, every group of fighters or guards on this continent contained at least a few women. When the party encountered a succubus, they were responsible for slaying it and then sleeping with the men to break the spell. Carmelita had no objections to her role. Whenever her band encountered a succubus, she killed it and slept with the men to break its enchantment. Of course, this sometimes resulted in pregnancies, but the women warriors accepted this and would return home proudly when it happened. The baby was eventually entrusted to the people of their village, and the warrior returned to her duties. Carmelita had already given birth to one such child herself. These babies were raised by their entire village, rather than their parents. All were cared for and treated equally regardless of their heritage or race. They were taught to fight as children, and once they reached physical adolescence, they underwent a coming-of-age ceremony and left their village behind. When a warrior grew too old to fight, they earned the right to return home and devote themselves to raising future generations. However, there were some who chose never to go back, preferring to spend their entire lives fighting. Bali Badam was one of these. Naturally, there was no real concept of marriage in these villages. Honestly, the culture shock was real. I'd read about tribes with similar arrangements back in my old world, but it was definitely hard to get my head around. I couldn't even manage to convince myself it was sexy. I looked over at Carmelita for a long moment, trying to understand things from her point of view.
I'm grateful to you, but I hate mages. If a succubus shows up, go to the other woman.
For some reason, it stung a little bit to get shot down in advance like that. although I could deal with the succubus thing myself anyway. Great Blade Taunt was a quiet man in his 30s with a thick mustache, light brown skin, and rippling muscles. He wasn't quite as tall as Balabadam, but their faces looked very similar. Without the facial hair, I could easily have mistaken them for each other. We spoke a little on our first night watch together, but he wasn't a chatty sort. It was a real contrast with Carmelita, who seemed to enjoy talking. I didn't have anything in particular I wanted to discuss, but time seemed to pass slower when we were just staring out into the darkness, silently. After a while, I tried to draw him out. I like your name, by the way. Great Blade Taunt. That's got a nice ring to it.
Yes, the matriarch chose it for me.
Oh, really? You didn't just pick up the nickname at some point?
The matriarch chooses our second names. It is so for all the warriors of the desert.
Apparently, their titles weren't just nicknames, but rather ceremonial names given to them by the village elder on the day they left it for good. For those with great strength, like Carmelita, this was often something like Bone Crusher or Mighty Arm. Those with sharp eyes, like Balibottom, were usually Hawkeye or Eagle Eye. You could usually tell from a person's name what their greatest talent was, in other words. But since there are only so many ways to call somebody strong, you'd sometimes run into another warrior who shared your name. Taunt was known as Great Blade, but his sword wasn't unusually massive by his people's standards. It was just a way of saying he had physical power. Maybe there was a one-cut killer out there, too. Well, people just started calling me Quagmire Rudeus, I guess. I used that spell every single battle for a while.
I haven't seen you create a quagmire even once.
Yeah, it wouldn't be too effective against the monsters around here. The spell was very useful against crawling, creeping, or walking monsters, but way less so against anything that could get itself up off the ground, like a succubus or griffin. And stopping a slow, heavily armored bug in its tracks didn't make that much of a difference. I wasn't bothering to stop monsters before I targeted them these days anyway.
Your magic is always flashy. If it's your specialty, I'd like to see it at least once.
Well, Quagmire's kind of a boring spell, honestly, but I'll try to use it sometime if I get the chance. With a small nod, Taunt fell silent. Apparently, he'd used up his supply of words for now. As our party moved further east, the land around us grew steadily greener. That Kinkara place lay in this direction, and a large jungle just beyond it. It struck me as a little strange that a jungle could exist so close to a barren desert, but we weren't going to get the chance to see it this time. When we reached a large vertical rock someone had left behind as a landmark, Galban changed our course, and we started heading north. After 3 days of traveling in that direction, we ran into the main regional road. It wasn't paved, much less actively maintained. It looked more like the natural product of countless travelers moving in the same direction. Compared to the sandy terrain we'd been traveling on, though, it felt firm and reliable underneath my feet. That suited me fine.
Sir, we might run into bandits now that we're on the road. I think we'll manage just fine, but if things turn ugly...
I'm paying you good money, aren't I? Just worry about keeping the goods safe.
Yeah, all right.
Balabadam clearly wanted Galban to consider abandoning the cargo in an emergency, but the man was having none of it. Maybe his merchandise was more important to him than his life. Didn't make much sense to me, but who was I to judge?
We gonna be okay, boss?
Don't waste your time worrying about it, bonehead.
For some reason, Balabottom and Taunt often referred to Carmelita in this way. I guess it was a friendly spin on the Bone Crusher thing, or maybe an insulting one. Either way, I had the feeling that she'd punch me in the face if I tried to use it.
Quagmire, Dragon Road, I want you two to stick to Galban like glue from now on. Taunt, you're on the camels. Don't let a single one slip away. Bonehead, you take the rear. I'll scout ahead of us and give the signal if something's up. You better not miss it.
You got it, boss.
Gotcha.
Roger. Assuming our new positions, we set off cautiously. The bandits around here mostly set ambushes and waited for people to blunder into them. From the sound of things, if you spotted them in advance and took a detour, it was possible to avoid trouble completely. Thanks to Balabadam's expert scouting, we were able to detect the first ambush in our path well ahead of time. We took a long, looping detour off the road and around the danger. As it turned out, this was a mistake. Maybe Badam was spotted by the enemy during his scouting expedition, and they tailed him back to us. Maybe he'd only seen a small part of the bandits' forces, and our detour just happened to lead us into their main army. Either way, we came under attack. It happened right after we'd put a safe distance between ourselves and the ambush. Everyone was just starting to breathe a little more easily. All of a sudden, Taunt had an arrow in his chest. He fell to the ground. Failing to understand what was happening, I started to rush over, intending to cast a healing spell. But Elenice grabbed me by the collar and pulled me back. As she did so, another arrow struck the camel that Taunt had been standing next to.
Run! We're under attack. They're coming from the west.
It finally hit me that we were in serious danger, and that we needed to flee for our lives. Elenice released me. Galban and the camels were already sprinting desperately forward. I followed after them, running as fast as I could. There was a group of men on horseback on a hill to our left, and they were charging at us. They were mounted, and we were on foot. All of them wore an identical sandy yellow turban.
Sir, we've got to leave the camels. They might let us go if we hand over everything.
Not a chance.
Are you suicidal or just an idiot?
Protect my cargo, damn it. That's what I hired you people to do.
It's not possible. There's just too many of them.
As Badam and Galban screamed at each other, our wounded camel stumbled clumsily. Just as I realized it was foaming at the mouth, it staggered off to one side and collapsed. A cold shiver of dread ran down my spine. These arrows were poisoned.
They're coming from the rear, too.
Another group of horsemen was bearing down on us from behind, and the archers on the hill were readying their next volley. Most of their shots were falling short, but a few could really make their arrows fly. Every now and then, one would come dangerously close to hitting us. There had to be 50 of them. No, 100. And that was just the ones that we could see. The word bandits had misled me pretty badly. This was an army we were up against. My heart hammering in my chest, I tried to analyze the situation. We were under attack from the flank and the rear. At the very least, there weren't any foes directly in front of us. That was where we had to flee.
Rudeus?
Right? I'm going to use Quagmire and Deep Mist. The spells popped into my mind immediately. Nothing else was going to work here.
All right, fine. Do it already.
Turning around, I summoned up the largest Quagmire I could manage. I didn't bother making it too deep. It just needed to trip up the horses. Badam, I'm going to blanket us in fog. Keep running straight ahead.
What?
Deep Mist. By summoning up an enormous amount of moisture in a wide range all around us, I effectively covered the area in a thick white shroud of mist. It almost felt like we were inside a cloud or something. No matter how talented their archers were, they wouldn't be landing any shots on us now. But a split second after that thought ran through my head, an arrow thumped into the ground a few feet in front of me. Gah! Startled, I nearly fell backward, but Elenice caught me before I hit the ground.
It's all right, Rudeus. They've got one brilliant archer, but he won't be hitting us again.
What? Was she saying that the same person had killed both Taunt and the camel? How did she know? It didn't matter, though. We had the mist on our side now.
Come on, run!
Nodding shakily, I got moving. He wouldn't be able to target us again. He wasn't going to hit me. It just wasn't possible. I was invincible. Damn it! I should have asked Sylphie for some lucky charm or something. Maybe I could have taken my souvenir of our first night together from the shrine.
Shit, they're catching up. Draw your sword, Carmelita.
Badam's shout brought me back to reality. When I listened closely, I could hear the sound of hoofbeats approaching us from behind. Some of the riders must have swerved around my Quagmire, and despite the fog I'd thrown up, all they had to do was charge straight in the direction they'd been moving. We were up against mounted fighters here. Cavalry did have some weaknesses, but their speed was a deadly weapon in itself. I'd seen at least 50 riders rushing toward us. 30? I didn't want to try fighting a group that large at close range. I'll slow them down. Keep running, everyone. Earth wall. I summoned up a thick 2-meter wall behind us without slowing my pace. A galloping horse couldn't be brought to a sudden halt. In this fog, many of them would probably smash right into it. Even if they realized it was there, they'd have to slow down and go around. There weren't arrows falling all around us anymore, but I still ran like my life depended on it. Every few seconds, I paused to summon up a new wall behind us. As I fled, I thought of Taunt, who'd taken an arrow to the chest at the very beginning of the ambush. Were we leaving him to die? No, he was a goner either way. That arrow had hit him in the heart, and it was poisoned. Even with advanced healing magic, it was probably a fatal wound. And more to the point, there was no chance we could have stopped to help him. Gritting my teeth, I focused on running as fast as I could. I'm not sure how long we kept running, but it felt like at least 2 hours. Probably more. Eventually, Ballybottom looked behind us and called out, "I think we've lost them," and everyone staggered to a halt. I was exhausted, of course, and soaked in sweat, but all my morning runs hadn't been in vain. I could have kept going if I had to. The 3 warriors in the party barely even had to catch their breath, though. That battle aura stuff was really just unfair. Galban collapsed to the ground, his face pale as a sheet. Even for a seasoned traveler who'd spent years on the road, running for 2 hours straight was a lot to ask. At least I wasn't the only one. We'd lost only 1 camel in the raid, and 1 bodyguard, of course. Poor Taunt. If I'd been able to yank that arrow out right away and take some time to cast healing and detoxification spells, there was a chance he might have lived. Maybe the arrow hadn't struck him right in the heart. I probably would have tried to save him if Elenilis hadn't grabbed me by the collar. But if I'd stopped to focus on him, I wouldn't have gotten away in time. The next arrow probably would have gotten me. Elenilis was right to pull me away. Her experience in battle had probably saved my life. Even if I'd only hesitated for a few seconds, it might have proven fatal. Looking around the group, I noticed that Carmelita was glaring at me. Had I done something to upset her back there? Nothing came to mind. During the ambush, she'd been positioned behind me in the rear of the party. Maybe she'd been injured at some point and needed healing. It didn't look like any arrows had hit her, though. All of a sudden, she stomped up to me and grabbed me by the front of my robe.
Why didn't you kill them? You could have. I saw your magic.
Nah? What was she saying? Had she expected me to kill that entire group of bandits? It sounded crazy. But after a moment, I realized that I'd never even thought about trying that approach.
Stop it, bonehead.
You saw it too, didn't you? He made the horses sink into the ground. He made them run into walls. He made everything foggy.
You're not thinking this through, damn it. Use your brain for once.
Shut up! If he'd used his magic, we could have avenged Taunt.
There were too many of them, kid. That was Haramoth's band out there, I'm sure of it. There were more of them behind those hills.
But
Eleniles had pushed herself in between me and Carmelita. She pressed her buckler against the woman warrior and put a hand on the rapier at her waist.
Do you object to the way we handled that?
what?
Rudeus acted appropriately given the situation. We were hugely outnumbered and facing a force of unknown strength. Worse, they were shooting poisoned arrows at us. He stopped their cavalry with his quagmire, blinded their archers with the mist, and bought us time to escape with his walls. He's the only reason we're alive. We lost 1 man and a single camel, but we got away. Would you have preferred to stand and fight? We would have died like fools, and they would have taken everything.
The actual words meant nothing to Carmelita, since Elenilis was speaking in the human tongue. Still, her frosty tone of voice made her meaning clear enough. It was rare for Elenilis to speak so aggressively to anyone, especially an ally. She did have a point about their raw numbers. I saw 50 bandits at the very least, but there must have been 100 of them or more. And as Ballybottom pointed out, they might have had more waiting in reserve. Could I have killed a force of that size single-handedly? It was hard to say, but I could use Saint Tier magic and probably enough mana to use it repeatedly for some time. After stopping the cavalry with a quagmire, I could have quickly cast a wide-range spell and decimated the archers. I could have knocked the riders off their horses with a blast of wind, then roasted them with fire magic. It was all theoretically possible. I wasn't confident I would have pulled it off, though. For all I knew, those bandits had experience fighting mages. If a single archer survived, a poison arrow might have come my way. Some of the riders could have slipped past my quagmire and cut us down. And if it ever turned into a melee, I couldn't have thrown around my spells without killing my allies. Elenelise was aware of all this. That was why she was taking my side so firmly.
And just to remind you, we're bodyguards, not mercenary soldiers. We didn't sign up to fight an entire army on our own. Is there a reason you're still glaring at me? Do you want to fight? Is that it? What a willful child. I'll indulge you if you insist.
Finally losing her patience, Elenelise drew her rapier. Carmelita hurriedly reached for her own broadsword. But before things could go any further, Balabottom stepped in between them.
Put it out, both of you. Look, it's a damn shame about Taunt. But Quagmire made the right call. The only one who wanted to fight was you, Bonehead. You really are a moron sometimes, you know that?
Shut up!
With a loud snort, Carmelita backed down. She proceeded to stalk over to where the camels were resting, crouch down next to them, and bury her face in her knees. Ballybottom watched her for a moment, then sighed.
Sorry about that, you two.
That's all right.
It's just, Carmelita had a kid with Taunt, you know?
Huh?
So, well, I think you can understand how she feels. She's just lashing out.
Those two had a child? I'd assumed that the female warriors of this continent didn't get emotionally attached to any one specific man, but clearly, that wasn't always the case. Maybe it was different when they had a baby with someone. As I stood there at a loss for words, Elenelise sheathed her rapier and turned around to face me.
There's no reason for you to feel down about this, Rudeus.
There isn't?
There are some adventurers out there who make a point of never killing another human being. Not many of them, granted, but they do exist, and you're going to become a father soon. I can understand why you'd hesitate to take so many lives.
Her attempts to comfort me were a little off the mark. But of course, she didn't know what Balabadom had just said to me. To be honest, I hadn't hesitated at all. The thought of killing those men just hadn't even entered my mind, despite the mortal danger we were facing. Of course, a few riders had probably lost their lives riding headfirst into those walls I threw up in the mist. I didn't feel any guilt about that either. But the idea of using magic to murder someone directly just made me queasy. It was kind of pathetic, honestly. Thanks, Elenelise. Still, I thanked her for trying to cheer me up. Thinking back on it, she'd been running right at my side for the entire retreat. When I lost my balance, she'd been there to brace me. It felt like she'd positioned herself to shield me from any stray arrows, too. I had a feeling she considered herself my bodyguard more than anything else.
No need to thank me, dear. I'll always look out for my grandson.
Your grandson, huh? By the time we got back home, Sophie's belly would be very big. That baby was going to be Elenise's great-grandchild. I'm sure she wanted its arrival to be a happy occasion. Or maybe she just didn't want to have Sophie tearfully asking her why she'd failed to keep me safe. Either way, the solution was simple enough. We just have to make it back together. Elenise...
What now?
Thank you, really. This time, I put more feeling into the words. In reply, Elenelise just patted me on the shoulders. Despite the awkward atmosphere, our party moved steadily onward. Ballybottom was surprisingly calm and collected, considering we'd just lost another of his men. His first focus was on reworking our formation. Far from pausing to mourn his comrade, he didn't even speak Taunt's name again. He was the same professional-focused bodyguard he always was. It seemed a little cold, but this was probably just how things went in his line of work. His people were used to this. Death was a constant companion for them. A single mistake or a little bad luck was all it took to end their lives. This was a common attitude on the demon continent as well. In retrospect, it was a way of thinking I couldn't quite understand. A few uneventful days later, we reached the oasis that marked the midway point of our journey. Much like Bazaar, it was mostly a marketplace surrounding a small central lake. I hadn't noticed before, but every other armed group we saw did have at least one woman among them. They were all warriors of the desert as well, presumably. Galban and the others pitched our tents in an open corner of the little town. While we were in the oasis, at least, the bodyguards apparently got to sleep inside too.
Balibadom, do you think we need to hire someone to replace the man you lost?
Shouldn't be necessary, Galban. These two are more useful than your average warrior. I think it's smarter to head to Rapan with our current group, than hire some new folks there. We shouldn't be running into any more bandits anyway.
I see. All right, then, let's do that.
These things happen. We were lucky to get away, that likely, considering their numbers.
Balabadam and Galban seemed to be on casual terms. It almost sounded like they were business partners, to be honest.
What is it, Rudeus? Is there something on my face?
Sensing my gaze, Galban turned to look at me. It's nothing, really. I was just thinking that you and Balibadam seemed to get along.
Ah, yes. We've worked together since the days when I was just a fledgling merchant, you see. I trust him more than anyone.
Interesting. If they'd spent that much time together, maybe Balibottom had always been closer to Galban than Todd, his fellow warrior. After years and years serving as a head bodyguard, it was possible he'd started to see his men and women as disposable, or at least interchangeable, given how regularly they came and went. We stopped in the oasis long enough to rest up and replenish our supplies of perishable goods, then headed on to the north. Carmelita didn't pick any more fights with me, but she wasn't any friendlier than necessary either. We didn't talk during our night watch shifts anymore. I tried not to let it get to me. We'd be going our separate ways once we reached Rapan anyway. Still, I had to empathize with what she was going through. I couldn't imagine what it felt like to lose the father of your child so suddenly. I knew how much it would hurt if Sylphie up and died on me, at least. I'd been overwhelmed with joy when I learned she was pregnant. If I lost her suddenly, the despair would be even more intense. And I guess I'm going to regret this, aren't I? Assuming the man-god was being straight with me, this voyage to the Begarit continent was going to cost me one way or another. He'd first told me that when I met Elenize at the age of 15, I'd spent some time in Renoa, but Nanahoshi's shortcut meant I wasn't getting to Rapan that much later than I would have if I'd left when I met Elenize. I had to assume the danger that awaited me in Rapan hadn't changed in that time. If that was true, though, it probably meant no harm would come to the people I'd left behind in Renoa. After all, if I'd left for Begarit right away, I wouldn't have met Sylphie or gotten to know my other friends. I'd have no reason to regret some disaster taking place there. But now that I thought about it, maybe the regrets that lay ahead were different now. Things might go smoothly on my end, but poorly back home. Something might happen to Sylphie or the baby.
Did you say something, Rudeus?
Nah, it's nothing. I had to stop speculating about this. You could drive yourself insane thinking about all the ways things might go wrong, and a guy like me was always going to make mistakes no matter how hard he tried. There was no telling what the future held. This was the first time I'd ever directly gone against the man-god's advice. Up until now, I'd done well for myself by following his lead. Did that mean this choice was going to end in disaster no matter what I tried? Nah. I wasn't buying that. I knew there was danger ahead, so it should be possible for me to avoid it. Still, there was a real risk someone I cared about might end up like Taunt. If I wanted to prevent that, I needed to stay sharp. And if there was someone out there who wanted to harm my family, this time, stop it. This is pointless. I could tell myself anything I wanted, but I had no reason to believe I was even capable of murder. I'd just have to do everything I could to keep my family safe. That, at least, I could promise myself. 2 weeks later, we finally reached the labyrinth city of Rapan. We'd made it to our destination. Now it was time to get started. Extra chapter, Norn and the Millis Church. Norn Greyrat was feeling uneasy, to put it lightly. A month had passed since her brother Rudeus left to travel to the Begarit continent, and life in the city of Sharia was as peaceful as ever. It was very hard to believe that most of her family was in danger in some strange, far-off land. Still, Norn's heart was troubled. There had been no word from Rudeus, of course. Not that she'd expected there to be. What was he going through right now? Was it her pestering that had driven him out there? To face dangers he was unprepared for. If Rudeus died, Sylphie would be devastated. She'd weep and weep, holding a fatherless child in her arms. Norn was just a child herself, and she might not be as sharp as her sister. But even she understood that Sylphie's brave smile was only an attempt to hide her real feelings. Deep down inside, Sylphie was suffering even now. No matter how talented a magician Rudeus might be, there was still a possibility he'd die on his trip to the Greyrat continent. And Norn had been the one who put him up to it. If she hadn't pestered him, if she hadn't been so selfish, Rudeus and Sylphie would still be living together right now. It was a painful thought. The anxiety and regret were enough to crush her. Looking out the window of her dorm room, Norn heaved a long sigh. It was something she did regularly these days. Outside, she spotted a few students walking in the direction of the school gates.
Oh, right? I'm supposed to be going home today.
Once every 10 days, she was required to make an appearance at the Greyrat family house. Today was that 10th day. Rising reluctantly to her feet, Norn started to get ready to leave. As she walked toward the Greyrat home, her thoughts continued to dwell on the situation at hand. The resentment or mistrust she'd felt towards Rudeus was mostly gone. She didn't hate him the way she once had, either. But that was part of what made this so scary. What if he didn't come back home? What if a letter arrived informing them of his death? She didn't know if she could bear that now. Noticing something out of the corner of her eye, Norn came to a stop. She'd spotted a distinctive building standing at the end of a side street. Back in the holy country of Millis, buildings like these were a very common sight. Every section of the city had one of its own. But since leaving that land behind, she'd seen very few of them.
Is that a Millis church? I didn't even know there was one in this city. It wasn't built exactly like the churches in Millis, so it felt a bit odd to her. But its white color and basic design still made its function obvious. Come to think of it, I haven't said many prayers lately.
Norn was a member of the Millis faith. Back in the holy country, when she was in the care of her mother's family, they brought her along to church on a regular basis. She'd learned the basics quickly enough, not something she'd consciously chosen to do herself, but she didn't feel like her family had forced her into it either. It was important to learn the church's teachings in Millis. Everyone expected you to know them and obey them. Still, she wasn't exactly a passionate believer. After leaving Millis behind, she hadn't felt the need to wander around looking for churches to say her prayers in. But today, Norn found herself turning down that side street. The interior of the church was, in contrast to the street outside, rather tranquil. It certainly felt as if she'd stepped into a sacred space. The hush in the air, the imposing design of the building itself, the hint of warmth, it was all familiar to her. The ceiling was a bit lower than those of the churches Norn remembered, but the orderly rows of benches were the same, and so was the sacred shrine in the rear. Feeling a bit nostalgic, Norn made her way up to the holy symbol of Millis, kneeled down and joined her hands together. She hadn't prayed in years now, but her body still remembered how to do it.
Great St. Millis, hear my prayer. Please bring my brother home safely, and my father, and my mother, and Lilia too.
Norn felt a brief stab of worry that she might be asking too much by naming everyone individually like this. St. Millis never interceded on behalf of the greedy. It was important to keep your wishes modest, and yet she decided only to rephrase her prayer.
Please help everyone make it back safely.
If Millis saw fit to grant this plea, Norn's family would finally be whole again. They could finally live together for the first time in many years. That was what Norn wanted more than anything. In fact, at the moment, it was the only thing she really wanted. If even that was asking too much, she wasn't sure what she was supposed to do. By the time she finished with her prayers, Norn was feeling a bit better. Maybe the atmosphere in this church was nice. Or maybe she'd managed to sort out her thoughts by putting them into words. Either way, she found herself thinking, I should come again. Norn attended her classes, did her exercises, and then headed to the church after school. This soon became her new routine. When she prayed, she always felt a little better afterward. It felt like she was doing her part somehow. But then, one day, something gave way inside her.
Please let everyone come back safe.
When she murmured the same words she always did, A tear trickled from her eye. It ran slowly down her cheek before dropping off her chin. A second followed it, then a third, and all of a sudden, the dam had broken. Norn knew, of course, that she was only consoling herself by coming here. Praying made her feel like she was doing something, but she wasn't, really. There wasn't anything she could do. That was how things always had been, and it was how things would always be. She was powerless, and she knew it. Sniffling, Norn covered her face, although there was no one here to hide it from. She felt pathetic and frustrated. She hated how useless she was.
Why are you crying?
The voice seemed to come out of nowhere. Startled, Norn looked up and around the church. She thought she was alone. There was a priest who ran this place, but he often wasn't around at this hour. That was why she usually had the place to herself. But today, there was someone else here, a young man who had just emerged from the confession booth. He looked about the same age as her brother Rudeus. His hair was long enough in front that she could only barely make out his eyes. Something the way he looked at her made her think he was the headstrong type.
Who are you?
What, you don't recognize me? I'm Cliff Grimoire. I'm a novice at this church. Just started here this year.
For a mere novice, this young man seemed a little full of himself, but that arrogant tone helped spur Norn's memory. She'd met him once before. He was a friend of her brother's, and a somewhat notorious student at the University of Magic. Now that she thought about it, she'd seen him at this church as well. When they said Mass here, he was often hanging around helping out the priest.
Oh, right, of course. Oh.
Wiping away her tears, Norn bowed her head slightly. Cliff snorted and strode closer to her.
Something bothering you then? Go ahead, tell me all about it.
Huh?
If something is making you miserable for no good reason, I'll deal with it for you. You have my word.
Norn was honestly just confused by this sudden offer. This man was her brother's friend, yes, but the two of them were basically speaking for the first time.
But...
I think you may be aware, but the woman Rudeus is traveling with is my wife. I'm worried about her, of course, but I have faith in Rudeus's skills. I'm confident that he'll keep her safe. So for my part, I have an obligation to protect his family here in Sharia. If he risks his life for Lee's, I'll do the same for you and your sister.
Now it made a bit more sense. Norn had known that Elenali's woman was once in her father's party, but not that she was married. It figured, though, considering how beautiful she was.
I've noticed you coming in to pray every day from the confession booth. But this is the first time you broke down in tears, right?
Norn had no way of knowing this, but Cliff tended to use these quiet afternoon hours to get a bit of studying done inside the confession booth while waiting for the rare visitor. Normally, he stayed in there unless he had some chore to take care of, but he'd revealed himself when he saw Norn crying.
Go on, you can trust me. I'll take care of everything. Is it an awkward problem? We can use the confession booth if you like.
Norn was a little wary of the offer. In her experience, it was usually wisest not to trust anyone you were meeting for the first time. But as she hesitated, she found herself remembering her brother remembering the day he'd visited her in her dorm room. She remembered the look on his face. He'd been as anxious as she was. Maybe Cliff, for all his big talk, was feeling the same things as her. His wife, Elenales, had set off for the Bagarat continent. He probably wanted to go along with her, but he hadn't been able to, just like Norn. In that case, maybe he could understand how she was feeling.
Well, actually...
And so, Norn opened up to Cliff. At first, she explained, her brother had decided not to go to Bagarat, but then she'd pushed him to reconsider, and he'd eventually changed his mind. There was a chance that Rudeus would die as a result. Sylphie would be heartbroken, of course. She loved Rudeus very much, and they were about to have a child and start their own family. If Sylphie lost him now, it would be a crushing blow. Norn knew how badly it would hurt, and if this happened, it would all be a crushing blow. When she heard her father was in trouble, she'd been desperate to help. She'd wanted very badly for Rudeus to go save him, but at the time, it hadn't even occurred to her that he might not come home. All she could do now was go to school, attend her lessons, and say a few prayers in the afternoon. But her prayers were just a way of comforting herself. She was powerless. There was nothing she could do to help. The more she thought about that, the sadder it made her. That, Norn concluded, was why she'd started crying.
What, is that all?
What do you mean? Is that all?
Norn had expected Cliff to understand, so his words felt like a kind of betrayal. But despite her sulky glare, Cliff snorted once again.
Listen, I'm not trying to brag, but I hail from Millis.
That's where I came from, too.
Let me finish, please. I'm the grandson of the Millis Pope. I was mixed up in a power struggle there, so my grandfather shipped me off to study here. In other words, I can't just go back home anytime soon. No matter how much I want to help my family, I can't do a thing for them. I'm a lot like you, in other words. What do you think I should do about that?
Why are you asking me? I don't know.
She didn't have an answer to that question. That was why she'd been crying. That was why she turned to him for advice.
I see. Fortunately, I'm something of a genius, so I know the answer. Would you like to hear it?
Yeah, please.
Cliff's tone was getting on Norn's nerves, but she did want to hear what he had to say.
Very well, then. First of all, think about the reason why I'm in this city. I was sent here because of the power struggle back home. Why? Because I'm too weak to defend myself. I'm young, inexperienced, and have no real authority. It would have been very simple for them to abduct me and use me as a hostage. My grandfather's a sharp, ruthless man, but I'm a valuable part of his plans for the future. If his enemies kidnap me, he would be forced to listen to their demands.
Norn could understand this. It wasn't so different from the reason she'd been left behind here. If she were as powerful as Rudeus, she might have been traveling with him right now, or even making her way through the Greyrat continent on her own.
Basically, if I want to avoid becoming a hostage, I need the strength to defend myself from violence.
Strength? What do you mean?
I'm not talking about physical power. In my case, I'm focusing on studying, gathering as much information as I can, and learning new magic. Oh, and making friends counts too. Especially if they have unusual skills or might rise into positions of power. When you've got strong allies on your side, it's harder for your enemies to hurt you.
This last point was something Cliff had only come to realize fairly recently after falling in love with Elenilas and making friends with Rudeus. But there weren't many people out there who could tolerate his attitude, so he hadn't expanded his own social circle very much as of yet. Apart from Rudeus and Zenoba, there was maybe Nanahoshi, but that was about it.
So you're training yourself, basically? For what?
If I'm suddenly called back home to Millie's one day, I want to bring new skills, new magic, and new connections with me. I'll make use of them to help my grandfather and quickly secure myself a lofty position in the hierarchy of the church.
This was all just a fantasy at this point, of course. But Cliff believed in it earnestly. As long as he trusted in his abilities and worked to develop them, he was sure this future would come to pass.
That's never going to happen, though.
No one was going to call her to the Greyrat continent anytime soon. Even if they did, she wouldn't be of any use. If her brother and her father couldn't deal with the situation by themselves, she certainly wasn't going to be of any help.
Oh, but it will. Not tomorrow, and not the day after tomorrow, but someday there will come a day when our strength is put to the test. Perhaps it will be a year from now, perhaps 5 or even 10. Listen, Norn, there isn't much we can do now that we've been left behind. If we tried to go and help, we'd only get in the way.
I know that.
Good. This is the very reason why we need to use this time effectively. We need to focus on the few things we can do, and we need to grow stronger. This happens to be a teaching of the Milas Church, by the way.
Cliff reached into his robe and took out a small copy of the Holy Scriptures. He proceeded to recite a passage from memory, without even opening the book.
Amos chapter 12, verse 31. In these times of suffering, the righteous one endured. In these days of hardship, he cultivated his strength. When the weak of heart asked him why, the righteous one told them that the day would surely come for him to strike with all his might. And when the wicked king of demons bore down on them with his great host, the righteous one swung down his holy sword upon him. That blade divided the mountains, the forests, and the seas, and it cleft the wicked king of demons in twain.
Norn remembered this verse as well. It was one she'd memorized several times at her old church. The story of St. Milas bringing down his holy sword on the demon army. The power of that weapon was so great that it reached from Elysian to the Blue Worm Mountains, and then to the Great Forest, and then across the ocean. It struck the Demon King at the spot where Windport now stood, killing him instantly. The place where Milas launched this attack was now known as the Holy Sword Road.
The stupendous might of St. Milas is what most people remember about this passage, of course, but its true importance lies at the beginning. Even Milas himself was not omnipotent. He needed to bide in his time and gather his strength before he could bring down the holy sword on his enemies. If you look to the history books, you'll read that the Millis army fought a great battle against the demons on the northern coast during this period. The human army's commander was Peter Dolyar, said to be St. Millis's closest friend, and he died in the fighting. Pained as he was by this loss, Millis kept his focus on the future.
You mean he abandoned his friend? He left him to die?
Millis trusted his friend, and his friend trusted him. It was for that very reason that Peter fought to the death to slow the demons' advance rather than retreating in defeat. And thanks to that sacrifice, their shared dream of victory and peace was realized.
With this emphatic lecture at an end, Cliff stared down into Norn's eyes.
Now tell me, what is your dream?
I just want my family to be reunited. I want us to be happy again.
Then do what you can to realize that goal. Study hard and learn your magic. It will be a great relief to your brother Rudeus and your father, wherever they might be.
What am I supposed to do after that? After I've learned what I can? I mean...
Cliff nodded, having expected this follow-up question. Turning to the shrine where the church's holy symbol was mounted, he paused for a moment and then answered.
In the end, you pray. St. Millis is always watching over us.
If Cliff had been speaking to Rudeus, the mage would have rolled his eyes at this. But Norn wasn't like her brother. She was moved by these words. For the first time, she felt that the things she'd learned in church truly were meaningful. Her teachers back in Millis had always told her to end every day with a prayer. It had seemed a bit arbitrary at the time. Why not begin the day with a prayer? But now she understood. There had been a reason for it after all.
I think I understand. I'll focus on doing what I can for now.
I'm very glad to hear that. If you run into any trouble or need help with your studies, feel free to seek me out. I'm usually here at this time of day, but you can also find me at my laboratory on campus.
All right.
Norn left the church that evening in a newly buoyant frame of mind. She had a goal now. She would follow the teachings of her faith and grow stronger in her brother's absence. It wasn't much, but it was a start.